You are a parish clerk in Avignon in June 1348, and you've just discovered that your own body has decided to join the pending file list. While you transcribe the confessions of victims whose skin has turned the color of spoiled plums, you feel a walnut-sized lump beneath your jaw, the exact same symptom you've clinically documented in 263 cases before yours. The Black Death is currently wiping out between 30 and 60% of Europe, a slaughter so efficient it managed to screw up historical statistics for the next 7 centuries. But at the papal court, the end of the world is no excuse for sloppy paperwork. The cardinal's inspector arrives in 7 days, and a misplaced comma is the fastest route to excommunication and your family's eviction. The mystery isn't how you'll end. The schedule of your dissolution is already mapped out, from hemorrhaging to final collapse. But whether your hand will obey long enough to save your loved ones before you become a blurry statistical data point yourself. You have 168 hours to decide if your final act will be serving a church that never extends deadlines, or sabotaging the system for those left behind. In Avignon, death is a certainty but an incomplete ledger. That's an unforgivable professional failure. The razor catches on the swelling, your hand stops. The blade sits against skin that feels fever-hot already, though the fever itself won't arrive for another 12 hours according to every case you've documented. You set the razor down beside the wash basin and press 2 fingers against the lump. It doesn't move. Calcific density, the same texture you felt through 263 dying throats when penitents came for final confession, and you had to verify the buboes were genuine plague rather than ordinary abscesses that might heal. 3 centimeters diameter. You don't need calipers to know, but you fetch them anyway from the documentation kit on your desk. The tenement scriptorium is cramped, 3rd floor above the street of the dying, and the June morning light comes thin through the single window facing east. You measure the bubo with the same clinical precision you use for confession entries. 3.2 centimeters. Immobile. The skin over it is taut and hot. You write the first entry in your personal symptom log. June 14th, first light. Submandibular node. Right side. Diameter 3.2 centimeters. Mobility 0. Consistency calcific. Fever onset anticipated within 12 hours. Third-person voice. The same detached notation you use for strangers who come to confess sins before their bodies fail them completely. The confession ledger sits on your desk beside the symptom log. 87 pending transcriptions. Each one a parchment scroll containing final words from souls on the street of the dying below, waiting to be copied into the permanent archive before Father Guillaume Arnaud arrives with his sealed instructions, and his reputation for never granting extensions regardless of circumstance. The inspection notice is pinned to the wall above your desk. 7 days to complete all entries or face excommunication and seizure of all church-held property, including this tenement. Marie and her 3 children live on the 2nd floor. Your clerical income is the only thing keeping them housed. Your previous replacement, Brother Thomas, left 43 entries incomplete when he died at his desk in April. His sister lost church housing within a week. You documented what happened to them afterward, the relocation to the quarantine district where bodies stack in courtyards and survival measures in days rather than months. You pick up yesterday's transcriptions from the desk. Your handwriting shows the telltale rightward slant in the final 3 entries. Every clerk's hand does this in their final week. The letters lean right as motor control begins its slow departure. You've documented it in 17 clerical deaths since March. Now it's happening in your own script, the first visible evidence that your body has entered the same 7-day countdown you've been recording with methodical detachment for 3 months. The stack of pending confessions sits beside the ledger. 87 souls, 168 hours. You calculate the transcription rate required, 0.52 entries per hour, assuming uninterrupted consciousness, and no further degradation of motor control beyond the current rightward slant. The bubo beneath your jaw pulses with your heartbeat, not painful yet, That comes later, around day 3, when the swelling spreads and the skin begins to darken. You've documented this progression 263 times. You know what comes next with medical precision. The fever tonight, the second bubo by tomorrow dawn, the black discoloration by day 3, the delirium by day 5, the hemorrhaging by day 6. Father Arnaud arrives on day 7. Father Arnaud, who has never granted an extension in 27 years of papal administrative service, who prosecuted clerical negligence during the Inquisition, who carries the authority to excommunicate and seize housing regardless of how many children depend on the clerk's income. You open confession entry 41, a baker's wife describing bubos in her groin. She used the phrase swellings in the area of previous carnal corruption, because that's how the Church requires sins of the flesh to be documented, even when the flesh in question is simply dying according to lymphatic rebellion rather than moral failure. You touch the bubo beneath your jaw again, still there, still growing. You return to the ledger and begin transcribing the baker's wife's final confession, with increased pressure on the quill to compensate for the rightward slant, each letter requiring conscious correction. The morning bell tolls from the cathedral. First light is over. The street of the dying below your window is already moving. The sound of cartwheels on cobblestones, someone coughing in the tenement across the lane. 87 confessions. 7 days. You dip the quill and continue writing. You finish the baker's wife's confession by mid-morning. Entry 41 now complete, copied into the permanent ledger with proper ecclesiastical language regarding her inguinal swellings and her concern that God would interpret bubos in that particular location as evidence of carnal sin, rather than simple anatomical misfortune. You wrote lymphatic rebellion in the region of the groin, as compromise between medical accuracy and theological acceptability. The problem is that you now face the same documentation challenge. Your symptom log requires exact descriptions of where bubos appear and how they progress, but the Church requires confessions, including presumably self-confessions by dying clerks, to use language that acknowledges the body as a site of moral corruption. This creates the theological problem of whether you should describe your own plague symptoms as swellings in areas associated with previous carnal activity, or simply left inguinal node, anticipated diameter 3 centimeters by dawn tomorrow. You've been writing lymphatic rebellion as bureaucratic compromise. It satisfies neither medicine nor theology, which makes it perfect for papal administration. The Church requires confession transcriptions to include the penitent's exact wording regarding sins of the flesh, which creates the theological problem of whether scribes documenting their own plague symptoms should describe bobos in the groin as swellings in the area of previous carnal corruption, or simply left inguinal node, diameter 3 centimeters. You have been writing lymphatic rebellion as compromise. The bubo beneath your jaw has grown since first light. You measure it again with calipers. 3.8 centimeters. 0.6 centimeter growth in 4 hours. You record this in the symptom log, with the notation, growth rate consistent with documented progression, fever onset now anticipated within 8 hours rather than 12. Your hand is steady, the rightward slant has not increased since dawn. This is good. Motor control degradation typically accelerates after fever onset, which means you have 8 hours of maximum efficiency remaining before transcription speed begins its measurable decline. The inspection notice catches your eye again. Father Arnaud's seal, the papal authorization, the 7-day deadline that makes no accommodation for the fact that half of Avignon's clerical staff has died at their desks in the past 3 months. You open confession entry 42. A cloth merchant describing the moment he realized the swelling in his armpit meant he had perhaps 3 days to settle accounts, reconcile with his brother over a property dispute from 6 years prior, and confess to the sin of charging pilgrims double rate for wool cloaks during the Pope's Easter processional. The man died before reaching the reconciliation with his brother. You know this because Brother Domenico, the Franciscan infirmarian, added a note at the bottom of the scroll. Expired during confession, final words incoherent, last rites administered, body delivered to plague cart 14 hours post-mortem. The timestamp is precise. Brother Domenico believes that precision in death documentation is itself a form of prayer. You begin transcribing the merchant's confession. His handwriting, he wrote it himself before coming to the parish, knowing he might not have breath enough to speak it all, is cramped and increasingly illegible toward the end. You translate his script into formal ecclesiastical Latin, turning, "I cheated the pilgrims because I needed the money for my daughter's dowry, and I'm not sorry except that I'm dying now and maybe God cares about this more than I thought," into, "The penitent confesses to the sin of avarice in commercial transactions involving sacred pilgrimage, motivated by familial obligation, and expresses concern regarding divine judgment of said avarice in light of his impending mortality." The Church prefers abstractions. Avarice sounds like theology. Cheating pilgrims sounds like crime. You finish the merchant's entry by noon. The bubo beneath your jaw is noticeably larger. You don't need to measure it to know. The skin is pulling tight. The sensation like a walnut expanding inside a leather purse that cannot stretch any further. You measure it anyway. 4.1 centimeters. 0.3 centimeter growth in 90 minutes. The fever will arrive sooner than 8 hours. You revise your symptom log. Fever onset now anticipated within 6 hours. Motor control degradation will begin overnight. Transcription efficiency will decrease by approximately 30% per day following initial fever. 6 hours until Father Arnaud's timeline begins to matter in a new way. 6 hours until your handwriting starts its inevitable deterioration. 86 confessions remaining. You calculate the revised timeline. 0.52 entries per hour was the original target. With 30% daily efficiency loss, you'll need to complete at least 15 entries before the fever arrives to maintain any chance of finishing before Father Arnaud's inspection. 15 entries in 6 hours. 0.4 entries per hour, faster than your normal pace, but possible if you eliminate all breaks for meals and water. You open confession entry 43. By mid-afternoon you have completed 6 more entries. The bubo beneath your jaw now measures 5.3 centimeters and has developed a second node slightly below the first, a smaller swelling that will merge with the primary bubo by tomorrow morning, according to the progression pattern you've documented in 47 cases. Your handwriting has maintained its rightward slant without further degradation. This is slightly better than expected. Some clerks hold steady until fever onset. Others begin losing motor control hours earlier. You appear to be in the first category, which means the 6 hours remaining before fever might yield 12 entries rather than the anticipated 9. You have completed 47 confessions since dawn. 80 remain. Father Arnaud's inspection is 144 hours away. The calculation is straightforward. 80 confessions divided by 144 hours remaining. You've revised down from 168 to account for the fever arriving sooner than originally projected, equals 0.56 entries per hour. Still achievable if motor control degradation follows the median pattern rather than the catastrophic pattern you documented in Brother Thomas's final week. Brother Thomas's handwriting became illegible on day 4. He continued transcribing for 2 more days, but the entries were unusable. Letters overlapping, words fragmenting into shapes that resembled script but carried no meaning. The inspector rejected all of his day 4 through 6 work as evidence of negligence rather than effort, which meant 43 confessions went untranscribed, and his sister lost church housing. You will not let that happen to Marie. The stack of pending confessions sits beside your desk, each scroll tied with a black ribbon that indicates plague death. Most are written by the dying themselves, a final act before confession when breath becomes too scarce for speech. Others are dictated to Brother Domenico, his handwriting instantly recognizable. Perfect Franciscan script, Each letter a small architectural achievement, even when recording a baker's wife's fear that her bobos constitute divine punishment for the sin of watering down her husband's ale to make it last longer. You open confession entry 48. A mason describing the swelling in his groin that appeared 3 days ago, followed by fever, followed by the black discoloration that everyone on the street of the dying recognizes as the point of no return. The mason is concerned primarily with his tools, which he has bequeathed to his apprentice with the stipulation that the apprentice must finish the cathedral's north transept archway before claiming ownership. The theological content is minimal. He confesses to the sin of pride in his work, which he does not actually believe is a sin but includes in the confession, because he assumes God expects some admission of wrongdoing, and pride seems less damning than admitting he once stole 6 copper coins from the cathedral building fund to buy bread during the famine of 1346. You translate this into ecclesiastical language and move to confession 49. Outside, a rider passes on the street below, one of the papal couriers who carry Father Arnaud's advance reports between parishes, checking which clerks are still alive, which ledgers are complete, which families will lose their housing before the inspector even arrives. The fever arrives at sunset, 6 hours after your revised projection. It comes as a sudden chill despite the June heat, your body attempting to generate warmth against an invasion it cannot comprehend. You set down the quill and wait for the shaking to pass. It doesn't pass. You pick up the quill again, and continue transcribing, with increased pressure to compensate for the tremor in your hand. Confession 49 is a woman who died mid-sentence. Brother Domenico's note, final words, tell my daughter, followed by cessation of breath. Last rites administered, confession incomplete. You record this exactly as written. The inspector will note the incompletion, but incomplete confessions due to death mid-speech are considered acceptable evidence of clerical diligence, rather than negligence. It's the confessions that never reach the ledger at all that constitute heresy. The fever increases. You measure your temperature using the method Guy de Chauliac, the municipal physician, taught you last month. Press your palm against your forehead, then against the back of your neck, then count your pulse for 100 heartbeats. If the pulse exceeds 72 beats per minute, and the skin feels hot in both locations, fever is confirmed. Your pulse is 86. The fever is confirmed. You record this in your symptom log. Sunset, June 14th. Fever onset. Temperature elevated. Pulse 86. Motor control showing minor tremor in dominant hand. Transcription efficiency estimated to decrease 30% overnight. Bubo diameter now 5.3 centimeters, secondary node developing inferior to primary swelling. You return to the ledger. Confession 50 is a baker confessing to the sin of hoarding flour during the grain shortage of 1347, which he justifies as necessary for his family's survival, but acknowledges might constitute a failure of Christian charity toward his neighbors, who could not afford bread that week. You transcribe this with a hand that shakes slightly on every downstroke. The letters remain legible, barely. 79 confessions remaining. 138 hours, until Father Arnaud arrives with his sealed audit instructions, and his authority to excommunicate for incomplete records. The calculation is no longer 0.56 entries per hour. With 30% efficiency loss beginning tonight, you'll need to complete at least 20 entries before dawn, to maintain any possibility of finishing before your handwriting becomes unusable. You open Confession 51 and continue writing as the fever builds behind your eyes, and the bubo beneath your jaw begins to pulse with a pain that sits somewhere between pressure and heat, the sensation of flesh trying to contain something that has already outgrown its borders. The afternoon light slants through the scriptorium window at the angle that marks 3rd hour past noon. You have completed 16 confessions since Brother Domenico's departure. The fever has climbed exactly as the documented patterns predicted. You no longer need to touch your forehead to confirm its presence. The heat radiates from your skin into the still air of the chamber, a sphere of warmth that extends perhaps 6 inches from your body in all directions. The bubo has developed its own heat signature, a focused point of inflammation that pulses with each heartbeat. You documented the expansion at noon, 5.2 centimeters, vertical axis. The swelling now extends from the hinge of your jaw to a 0.2 centimeters below your ear. The skin over the bubo has drawn tight and developed the characteristic darkening at its center, the first visible sign of stage 3 progression, arriving 6 hours ahead of the average timeline. Your body does not follow average timelines, it accelerates them. Confession 58 describes a grain merchant who sold molded wheat to the papal kitchens during the shortage in March. The merchant died 3 days ago, but not before providing extensive detail about the storage cellar, where the remaining contaminated grain sits in unmarked barrels, still awaiting sale. You transcribe his description of the cellar's location with the precision Father Guillaume Arnaud's audit methodology requires. North wall of the Street of the Bakers, 4th building from the eastern corner, basement accessible through the trapdoor beneath the counter scales. Father Guillaume Arnaud built his reputation on finding exactly this type of detail in confession records. The inspector's methodology, as it exists in the 14-page manual he distributed to every papal administrative office in 1346, requires that each confession contain sufficient physical specificity to permit verification. Names, locations, measurements, dates. These are not supplementary notation. They are the evidence of clerical competence. A confession without verifiable detail is a confession that might be fabricated, and fabricated confessions constitute evidence of heretical negligence. The manual sits in the lower drawer of your desk. You have read it enough times to recite full passages from memory. Section 3, paragraph 7. The competent clerk understands that his duty extends beyond mere transcription. He serves as the Church's instrument of precision, capturing not merely the sin but the material circumstances that permit verification of truth. A penitent who confesses to theft must specify what was stolen, from whom, and where the stolen property now resides. Without such detail, the confession serves neither God's justice nor the Church's administrative requirements. You have been providing such detail for 11 years. The fever does not change this habit. The grain merchant's confession runs 4 pages. You complete the 3rd page and pause to resharpen the quill. The blade requires 2 additional strokes beyond the usual maintenance. Your hands have begun to shake enough that the first cutting pass missed the optimal angle. The tremor remains invisible to casual observation, but you feel it in the muscle fibers of your forearm. A fine vibration that increases with each hour of fever progression. Below you hear Marie's footsteps on the 2nd floor landing. She is moving between the children's chamber and the kitchen, the rhythm of her steps marking out her daily routine with the precision of cathedral bells. 3 steps, pause, creak of the door hinge that needs oil. 2 steps, pause. She stops at the base of the stairs that lead to your scriptorium. You hear her weight settle, as if she stands with one hand on the railing deciding whether to climb. She does not climb. The weight shifts away. Her footsteps retreat toward the kitchen. You return to the grain merchant's final page. Father Guillaume Arnaud arrives in 5 days and 17 hours. You have now completed 58 confessions. 70 remain. The mathematics require 20 confessions tomorrow, 20 the day after, 15 on day 3, 10 on day 4, 5 on day 5. But this calculation assumes your handwriting remains legible through day 5, assumes the fever permits sustained concentration through 126 more hours of transcription work, assumes stage 5 delirium does not begin early the way stage 3 darkening has begun early. The assumptions are failing before they fully form. You complete the grain merchant's confession and date it, June 14th, 3rd hour past noon. The entry joins the completed pile. The pile has grown thick enough now that it no longer sits flat against the desk. The parchment sheets compress under their own weight into a volume that measures perhaps 4 inches tall. 70 more inches to go, if each remaining confession averages similar length. A sound from the street of the dying rises through the window, cartwheels the specific creak of the death wagon making its afternoon collection. You do not look. You have heard this sound 6 times daily for 3 months. The wagon's route has become ritualized. Dawn collection, mid-morning, noon, mid-afternoon, evening, and a final pass after dark for those who died since sunset. The city has organized its death with the efficiency it once reserved for commerce. Guy de Chauliac will arrive within the hour for his afternoon examination. The physician maintains his rounds with the same rigid schedule as the death wagon. Dawn visits to the papal palace, morning consultations in the street of physicians, afternoon house calls to those patients whose status warrants continued monitoring, evening work in his laboratory off the Place de l'Horloge. You became worthy of afternoon house calls 12 hours ago, when your case progressed from theoretical to documented. The physician values documentation above all other qualities in a patient. You have heard him say this to Brother Domenico during their theological arguments about divine will versus empirical observation. A patient who can describe his symptoms with precision is worth more to medicine than 100 who merely suffer. You can describe your symptoms with precision. This may be why Guy de Chauliac continues to visit, even though your case will end like all the others. Not because he hopes to save you, but because you will provide superior documentation of your own dissolution. Confession 59 waits. A washerwoman who stole clothing from the bodies she was hired to prepare for burial, selling the better items to a merchant on the street of old clothes. She died yesterday. Brother Domenico noted that her final words concerned not the theft itself, but the coin she had hidden in a leather purse beneath a loose stone in her cellar, intended for her sister in Lyon who now would never receive it. You begin transcribing. The washerwoman's handwriting, or rather, Brother Domenico's transcription of her verbal confession, contains more detail about the clothing merchant than about the thefts themselves. This is common in confessions from the illiterate. They understand that names and locations matter to the church's record-keeping, even if they cannot fully articulate why. The clothing merchant operates from a stall on the eastern end of the street of old clothes, identifiable by a blue awning, with water damage along its southern edge. He pays in coin rather than barter, keeps no ledger, and conducts his business during the hours between dawn and mid-morning, before the guild inspectors begin their rounds. This level of detail satisfies Father Guillaume Arnaud's methodology. You transcribe it without editorial comment, though you understand that the washerwoman has effectively created a complete case for prosecution. If the Church chooses to pursue the matter, Brother Domenico's notation, combined with your transcription, provides sufficient evidence to locate the merchant, verify the crimes, and impose whatever penalty canon law requires for trading in burial clothing. You complete the washerwoman's confession in 45 minutes. The work requires more time than Confession 58, because your right hand has begun to cramp around the quill shaft, the muscles protesting their sustained grip. You have to pause 3 times to flex your fingers, working the stiffness out before continuing. This is not yet tremor. This is simple muscular fatigue, combined with fever-induced weakness. But it marks the beginning of the mechanical failures that will accumulate over the next 5 days. The completed confession joins the pile. 69 remain. Father Guillaume Arnaud's inspection protocol, as detailed in Section 7 of his methodology manual, requires that he examine not merely the content of confessions but the physical condition of the ledger itself. Ink consistency, parchment quality, evidence of erasure or overwriting, the uniformity of handwriting across entries, because uniformity suggests careful work, while variation suggests haste or incompetence. Your handwriting has maintained its uniformity for 11 years. The fever will break this record. Father Guillaume Arnaud will examine Confession 58 and compare it to Confession 90, and he will observe the degradation, and he will know exactly what that degradation signifies. A competent clerk maintains his standards regardless of personal circumstance. This is paragraph 4 of section 1. You have maintained your standards through winter cold that made ink freeze in its bottle, through summer heat that caused parchment to curl before the ink dried, through personal illness and family crisis, and the general administrative chaos of a papal seat adjusting to permanent residence in Avignon. The fever is simply another circumstance requiring professional adaptation. You begin Confession 60. A baker who sold undersized loaves during the grain shortage, pocketing the difference in flour weight over the course of 6 months. The confession includes a mathematical accounting of the theft. Each loaf sold 3 ounces underweight, 40 loaves per day, 180 days of systematic fraud. You transcribe his calculations with the precision they deserve, noting that the baker himself kept no written record, but could recite the exact figures from memory. 7,200 loaves, 1,350 pounds of stolen flour, current market value, 64 florins. The baker died this morning. His confession scroll sat on your desk when you arrived at dawn, placed there by Brother Domenico, who heard the confession during the baker's final hours. The scroll's ink has dried but retains the slight smell of the baker's sick room, fever, sweat and urine, and the beginning stages of tissue breakdown. You work carefully around the scroll's damaged edges where body fluids have stained the parchment. Guy de Chauliac's footsteps sound on the staircase. The physician climbs with the measured pace of someone conserving energy for a long day, each step deliberate, no wasted motion. He reaches the scriptorium door and knocks twice, the professional courtesy he extends to all patients who remain conscious and capable of response. Enter, you say. He enters carrying his leather case, the one with the brass clasps that contain his examination instruments. He sets the case on the corner of your desk, away from the confession ledgers, and studies your face for 3 full seconds before speaking. The bureau has darkened, he says. Show me. You set down the quill and tilt your head to the left, exposing the swelling beneath your jaw. Guy de Chauliac produces a candle from his case and lights it from the lamp on your desk, angling the flame to cast direct illumination across the bureau's surface. He leans close enough that you can smell the vinegar he uses to wash his hands between examinations, sharp and medicinal in the close air of the scriptorium. 5.2 centimeters at noon, you say. Darkening began approximately 2 hours ago. The center point has developed the characteristic purple discoloration. No drainage yet. The physician makes a sound of acknowledgement and retrieves a set of calipers from his case. The instrument is brass, delicate, marked with gradations in the Arabic notation he favors for precision measurement. He positions the calipers against your jaw with the gentleness of long practice, adjusting the arms until they bracket the bureau's widest axis. 5.6 centimeters, he says, vertical growth. The horizontal axis remains stable at 3.1. He records these measurements in a leather-bound notebook, his handwriting smaller and more cramped than yours, but equally precise. You have seen this notebook before during his previous visits. It contains morphological data from every plague case he has examined since March. Your bureau is now part of a larger statistical record, one data point among hundreds that Guy de Chauliac hopes will eventually reveal some pattern the church physicians have missed. Guy de Chauliac measures your bureaus with calipers, and records the dimensions with the enthusiasm of a cartographer mapping hell. He has developed a classification system, where your jawline swelling qualifies as Grade 3, ecclesiastical variant. You suspect this is not a compliment. He sets aside the calipers and retrieves a thin metal probe, heat sterilized and wrapped in linen. I need to test the tissue depth. This will be uncomfortable. Proceed. He unwraps the probe and positions its tip against the darkened center of the bubo. The pressure builds gradually. He is testing for resistance, for the point where healthy tissue transitions to infected mass. You feel the probe sink perhaps 2 millimeters into the swelling, before meeting the firm boundary of the bubo's core. The sensation is not quite pain, more a deep ache that radiates down your neck and into your shoulder. Depth consistent with stage 3, he says, withdrawing the probe. The core has solidified, no fluctuance. This indicates rapid lymphatic involvement. He wraps the probe again and returns it to his case, then presses 2 fingers against the side of your neck, feeling for your pulse. His fingers are cool, despite the afternoon heat. They rest against your carotid artery, for a count of 30 heartbeats before he releases the pressure. 108 beats per minute, he says, elevated from your baseline of 72. The fever is accelerating cardiac function. You already know this. You can feel your heart working harder, each beat pushing blood through vessels that have begun to offer increased resistance as the infection spreads. But Guy de Chauliac requires verbal confirmation of his observations. This is his methodology, the physician's equivalent of Father Guillaume Arnaud's administrative precision. Confirmed, you say. He produces a glass thermometer from his case, the instrument he commissioned from a Venice glassblower 6 months ago. The thermometer is a fragile tube of blown glass with gradations etched along its length, filled with colored alcohol that expands and contracts with temperature changes. It cost more than you earn in 3 months, and Guy de Chauliac treats it with appropriate reverence. Under your tongue, he says, do not bite down. You open your mouth and accept the thermometer, feeling the cool glass settle against the underside of your tongue. Guy de Chauliac retrieves a small hourglass from his case and inverts it. The sand begins its measured fall, timing the 3 minutes required for accurate temperature reading. He watches the hourglass rather than you, his attention focused on the mechanical precision of time measurement, rather than the human face of his patient. The thermometer warms against your tongue. You breathe through your nose, conscious of the need to keep your mouth closed and still. The bubo pulls at your jaw with each breath, a weight that seems to grow heavier with each passing minute. Below you hear the death wagon departing the street of the dying, its wheels creaking under the weight of this afternoon's collection. The hourglass empties. Guy de Chauliac removes the thermometer from your mouth and angles it toward the window light, reading the alcohol level against the etched gradations. 104.7 degrees, he says. Increase of 0.7 degrees since dawn. The fever curve matches documented progression. He records this in his notebook, his quill moving in quick strokes that suggest long familiarity with medical notation. You have transcribed enough of Guy de Chauliac's case notes to recognize his abbreviation system. He does not write fever curve matches documented progression. He writes FC right pointing arrow DP, and understands that his future self will decode this shorthand when reviewing the case months from now. If he survives months from now, if the plague does not take him the way it has taken 11 other physicians in Avignon since March. But Guy de Chauliac does not appear to consider this possibility. He works as if his own survival is mechanically guaranteed, as if dedication to empirical observation creates some protective barrier against bacterial infection. The secondary bubo will appear tonight or tomorrow morning, he says, returning the thermometer to its protective case. Most likely location is your left armpit, based on lymphatic drainage patterns from the primary site. Check every 3 hours. When you find it, send word to my laboratory. I will continue working, you say. He looks at you with the expression he reserves for patients who announce intentions that contradict medical reality. Not disapproval exactly, more a kind of clinical interest in observing how long will can sustain function against physiological collapse. You will continue working until you cannot, he says. This typically occurs during stage 5. 63% of cases maintain coherence through day 4. That percentage drops to 12% by mid-day 5. I need to reach day 6, you say. Why day 6? Father Guillaume Arnault arrives day 7. The ledger must be complete before his inspection. Guy de Chauliac closes his instrument case with decisive clicks of the brass clasps. The ledger will not matter if you are dead. The ledger matters to my family. Father Guillaume Arnault's report determines whether Marie keeps the church housing. If the inspection finds incomplete records, she and the children lose their residence. The physician studies you for a moment, his face unreadable. He has heard versions of this reasoning from dozens of patients. The desperate calculations people make when facing mortality. The attempt to impose order on dissolution through completion of earthly obligations. Most of these calculations prove futile. The body fails according to its own timeline, indifferent to administrative deadlines and family housing arrangements. Then you should prioritize the confessions most likely to receive scrutiny, he says. Father Guillaume Arnault focuses his audits on high-value penitents and cases involving clerical misconduct. Complete those first. The baker who died owing money to the Grain Guild matters more to an inspector than the washerwoman who stole burial clothing. This is strategically sound advice. It also contradicts every principle of clerical methodology you have practiced for 11 years. Confessions are recorded in the order they arrive, without regard to the social status of the penitent. This maintains the integrity of the chronological record and prevents the appearance of preferential treatment. Father Guillaume Arnault's methodology manual explicitly requires chronological ordering in Section 4, Paragraph 2. But Section 4, Paragraph 2 assumes a clerk who will survive to complete the chronological record. You may not. And a partially completed ledger organized by strategic priority might satisfy Father Guillaume Arnault's inspection requirements better than a chronologically perfect ledger that ends abruptly at Confession 73. I will consider this approach, you say. Guy de Chauliac moves toward the door, then pauses with his hand on the frame. I will return tomorrow at the same hour. If the secondary bubo appears before then, do not attempt to lance it yourself. The infection must resolve internally, or not at all. External intervention only accelerates systematic collapse. Understood. He departs. His footsteps descend the staircase with the same measured pace he used climbing, the rhythm of a man who has learned to conserve his energy across 12-hour days of patient rounds. You hear him exchange brief words with Marie on the second-floor landing. Her voice rises in a question you cannot quite distinguish. His response is too quiet to hear. Then the building's main door opens and closes. Guy de Chauliac returns to his rounds, carrying his leather case of instruments to the next patient who requires afternoon monitoring. You return to Confession 60. The baker's mathematical accounting of his flour theft remains half-transcribed on the parchment before you. You dip the quill and continue writing. Your hand has steadied slightly in the minutes since Guy de Chauliac's examination. The brief rest has given your cramping fingers time to recover. This reprieve will not last. The tremor will return within the hour, and each subsequent recovery period will grow shorter as the fever continues its documented progression. The baker's confession requires another 30 minutes to complete. You work without pause, transcribing his detailed recollections of the grain shortage and the economics that drove his systematic fraud. The confession reads more like a merchant's accounting ledger than a spiritual unburdening. The baker understood exactly what he was doing, calculated the risks against the profits, and made a conscious decision to steal. His guilt appears to stem not from the theft itself but from the discovery, the public shame that would have followed if he had survived to face trial. He did not survive. The plague provided a different judgment than canon law would have delivered. You complete his final paragraph and date the entry, June 14th, 4th hour past noon. Confession 60 joins the completed pile. 68 remain. Father Guillaume Arnault arrives in 5 days and 14 hours. The fever has climbed again. You feel it in the increased warmth radiating from your skin. in the way your vision has begun to show slight distortions at the periphery, where heat shimmer meets failing optic nerve function. The bubo pulses with each heartbeat, a metronome of inflammation marking time against the deadline you cannot change. You begin Confession 61. A midwife who administered herbs to induce miscarriage in 3 separate women during the spring months, charging 2 florins per procedure. The confession specifies which herbs: pennyroyal, tansy, rue, and notes that all 3 women survived the procedures, but 2 subsequently died of plague. The midwife appears uncertain whether God's judgment concerns the miscarriages or her survival when her patients did not. Brother Domenico added a marginal note suggesting the midwife's confusion indicates incomplete repentance. You transcribe this note verbatim. Father Guillaume Arnaud will interpret it as he sees fit. Your responsibility extends only to complete documentation, not theological adjudication. The afternoon light shifts as you work, the sun dropping toward evening angles. The temperature in the scriptorium begins to decline, the stone walls releasing their stored heat into the cooling air. This should provide relief from the fever, but instead you find yourself growing colder, your body's temperature regulation failing as the infection progresses. You continue writing through the chill, through the persistent ache of the bubo, through the building fatigue that makes each sentence require slightly more concentration than the one before. Confession 61 takes 40 minutes. Confession 62 takes 45. The incremental slowdown is measurable now, no longer within the range of normal variation. You are working at 90% of your dawn capacity, and the percentage will continue dropping through the evening and into the night ahead. Marie's footsteps sound on the staircase. This time she does not pause at the base. She climbs directly to the scriptorium level, moving with the determined pace of someone who has made a decision during hours of internal debate. She reaches the doorway and stops, holding a wooden bowl that steams with whatever soup she has prepared for the evening meal. "You need to eat," she says. You reach for fresh parchment mid-sentence, and the pain arrives like an iron spike driven into your left armpit. The movement stops. The quill stays suspended above the page. You lower your arm slowly, testing the range of motion. Anything above shoulder height produces sharp radiating pain. Anything below causes dull pressure. You find the neutral position, arm held against ribs, elbow at 90 degrees. The second bubo has declared itself exactly on schedule. You set down the quill and press 2 fingers into your left armpit through the fabric of your robe. The swelling measures approximately 2 centimeters in diameter. Dense. Immobile. The skin above it feels hot through the cloth. You withdraw your hand and record the observation in your symptom log. Day 2. Hour 6. Left axillary node. Diameter 2 centimeters. Mobility minimal. Pain acute on arm elevation. Fever 103 degrees. Timeline conforming to documented progression. The entry takes 40 seconds. Your handwriting remains legible. The rightward slant has increased by 3 degrees since yesterday, but the letters maintain consistent size and spacing. You have documented this progression in 147 previous cases. The handwriting deteriorates slowly through day 4, then collapses entirely by day 6 when the fever reaches the stage that makes fine motor control impossible. Father Arnaud will examine that handwriting, every slant, every tremor in the ink, every place where fever makes the letters drag. 6 days from now he will sit at this desk and run his finger down confession entries, looking for evidence that fever made you careless, that pain made you skip required phrases, that dying made you heretical. The handwriting is not just record, it is proof of your continued capacity for duty or evidence of your abandonment of it. You return to Confession 45. The penitent is a wool merchant who committed the sin of false measure, selling 37 ells as 40 over the course of 8 months. The confession runs to 3 pages. You have transcribed 2 pages and 4 lines. The remaining text contains detailed accounting of each fraudulent transaction, dates and customer names recorded with the precision of someone who kept excellent business records and now fears divine audit. You resume transcription with your left arm pressed against your ribs. The new posture adds 3 seconds per line. Previously you could complete 25 lines per quarter hour. Now you manage 21. The reduction compounds across the 87 pending confessions. You calculate the deficit while copying the merchant's itemized sins. 48 minutes per confession multiplied by 87 pending entries equals 69.6 hours. Inspector arrival in 144 hours. Margin for error: 74 hours if handwriting remains stable, less if fever progresses ahead of schedule, substantially less once the black discoloration begins, and your left hand becomes evidence of corruption rather than instrument of transcription. The wool merchant's confession includes the phrase, "Knowing my measure to be short yet claiming it true before God and customer alike." You copy it exactly. The rightward slant in your handwriting makes the descenders on the G and Y nearly vertical. Tomorrow they will slant further. By day 4 they will drag across the page like the tracks of something that tried to keep moving after structural integrity failed. You finish confession 45 as the church bells ring for none. The transcription has taken 51 minutes, including the time spent recording your new symptom. You have been working 9 hours since dawn. Your fever has climbed half a degree. The bubo beneath your jaw now measures 6.1 centimeters. The axillary node remains at 2 centimeters, but will double in size by tomorrow morning. Confession 46 waits on your desk. The penitent is a baker's widow who struck her daughter-in-law during an argument about bread allocation. The confession is mercifully short, only 1 page, but your left arm has begun trembling from being held immobile against your ribs for the past 51 minutes. You set down the quill and flex your fingers. The tremor subsides after 30 seconds. This is normal. You have documented voluntary tremor in 73 cases, always appearing on day 2, when the subject maintains unnatural posture to compensate for pain. The tremor resolves with brief rest. It becomes permanent on day 5, when it originates not from muscle fatigue, but from fever-damaged nerves that no longer transmit clean signals. You record the tremor in your symptom log. Voluntary tremor, left hand, duration 20 seconds, resolved with rest. The entry is clinically precise. Anyone reading it will understand exactly what it means and exactly what comes next. You pick up the quill and open confession 46. The baker's widow struck her daughter-in-law 3 times across the face. The daughter-in-law fell against the bread table. 2 loaves fell to the floor. The widow's confession focuses more on the wasted bread than the violence. You transcribe it with your arm held carefully still, and your handwriting slanting 3 degrees further right than it did this morning. 142 hours remain until the inspector arrives. 41 confessions remain to be transcribed. Your body is cooperating with the timeline you documented 3 months ago, when documentation felt like professional observation rather than personal countdown. The axillary node burns with each small movement. You adjust your grip on the quill and continue writing. The municipal physician arrives at none, unannounced, carrying a leather case that smells of vinegar and burnt rosemary. You are transcribing confession 47 when he enters. A stonecutter who used substandard mortar on a chapel repair, knowing the spring rains would expose the weakness. The confession is precise about the measurements. 3 parts sand to 1 part lime instead of the required 2-to-1 ratio. You are copying the technical specifications when the physician's shadow falls across your desk. "I was told you continue working," he says. You finish the line before looking up. The physician is perhaps 50, with the careful posture of someone who spends his days moving between sick rooms and wants nothing to follow him home. His robes are clean. His hands are wrapped in linen soaked in something astringent that makes your eyes water from 3 feet away. The confessions require transcription, you say. Yes. He sets down his case. I was told that as well. May I examine you? You extend your right arm. He unwraps the linen from his hands, revealing skin that looks raw beneath, then presses 2 fingers against your wrist. His touch is clinical. He counts your pulse against some internal reference, his lips moving slightly with the numbers. Pulse 108, he says. Elevated, but not critical. Fever? 103.2 degrees as of this morning. He nods and moves to your throat. His fingers probe the bubo beneath your jaw, with the same detached precision you use when documenting symptom progression. You have felt this examination from the other side 73 times. It is strange to be the subject rather than the observer. 6 centimeters, he says, firm, non-fluctuant, no evidence of suppuration yet. His hands move to your left armpit. This one is newer. Appeared at hour 6 today. He presses carefully into the axillary node. The pain is sharp enough that you involuntarily hold your breath. He notices and withdraws his hand. 2.4 centimeters, he says. The progression is typical. You have documented this pattern yourself, I assume. 147 times. Then you know what comes next. Yes. He opens his case and withdraws a small glass vial containing something dark and viscous. Theriac. 4 drops in wine. 3 times daily. It will not stop the progression, but it may slow the fever's climb. The papal physician swears by it, though I have seen no evidence of efficacy in clinical observation. You take the vial. The glass is warm from being carried against his body. Thank you. I am also to tell you that the Archbishop has been informed of your condition, and has arranged for Father Benedict to assume confession duties beginning tomorrow. You set down the vial very carefully. Father Benedict is 58 years old, and has transcribed perhaps 30 confessions in his entire career. He cannot complete 87 confessions in 6 days. No, the physician agrees, he cannot. The statement hangs in the air between you. Outside, a cart passes. The wheels make a sound like grinding stone. You pick up your quill and set it down again, testing the weight of your left arm. The axillary node sends a spike of pain up toward your shoulder. The inspector arrives in 6 days, you say. I know. Father Benedict will not be able to complete the transcriptions. No. The Archbishop knows this. The physician begins rewrapping his hands in the linen strips. The Archbishop knows that you are dying, and that the confessions must be transcribed by someone who is not dying. This is the extent of his concern. Whether the transcriptions are complete when the inspector arrives is a separate problem. He finishes wrapping his hands and closes his case. The smell of vinegar intensifies briefly, then fades as he secures the clasp. There is one other matter, he says, the discoloration on your left hand. You look down. The black staining has spread since morning. It now covers the entire back of your left hand, from wrist to knuckles, following the lymphatic channels beneath the skin, like ink seeping through parchment. The skin itself has not broken. It simply looks like someone dipped your hand in lampblack and the color soaked through to the bone. The municipal physician explains that the black discoloration is caused by corrupted humors seeking exit through the skin, which makes your left arm a site of humoral evacuation, and your right arm, still pink, an example of humoral retention. You are apparently asymmetrical at the humoral level. You examine your hands, one black, one pink, and return to the stonecutter's confession. The physician watches you copy 3 more lines of the substandard mortar specifications, your black hand moving steadily across the page, before he lets himself out. The theriac sits on your desk beside the symptom log. You do not open it. 4 drops in wine, 3 times daily, to slow a fever that needs to remain controlled for exactly 138 more hours. After that, the fever can do whatever it wants. You finish confession 47 and reach for 48. Your left hand leaves a faint smudge on the parchment edge. Not ink, just the optical impression of wrongness, the shadow of corrupted humors seeking exit through skin that can no longer contain them. Marie will see this hand tonight when you return home. She will not ask about it. She stopped asking clinical questions on day 1, when the answers became countdown rather than diagnosis. The afternoon light slants through the window at a steeper angle. In 7 hours it will be Vespers. You have 6 confessions remaining before sunset, then the evening's documentation, then the walk home where your black hand will rest briefly on the doorframe and leave no mark, because corruption does not transfer to wood, only to parchment and flesh, and the careful professional neutrality you have maintained for 9 hours while your body declares itself a humoral disaster zone. You dip your black quill in black ink and continue transcribing with your black hand. The stonecutter's confession requires another page. The mortar mixture was even worse than he initially admitted, 4 parts sand to 1 part lime in some sections. The wall will collapse completely within 2 years. Some things simply cannot be saved. You document them precisely and move on. Vesper's bell finds you at confession 51. A midwife who attended 3 births in one night and accepted payment from only 2 families. Unable to collect from the 3rd, because the infant died, and the father blamed her competence rather than God's will. The confession is bitter in places, defensive in others, and meticulously detailed about the birth complications that killed the child. Breech presentation, cord prolapse, maternal hemorrhage, that began before the midwife even arrived. You copy it exactly as given. The midwife's innocence or guilt is not your concern. Your concern is the integrity of the record, the completeness of the theological language, the proper documentation of sin confessed and penance assigned. Father Arnold will read this confession and see either a properly maintained record or evidence of negligence. The truth of what happened in that birthing room is irrelevant compared to whether the words on the page conform to ecclesiastical standards. Your left hand has started to stiffen. The black discoloration has spread to your wrist. The skin feels thick, less responsive, as if the corrupted humors seeking exit have turned the tissue into something between flesh and leather. You flex your fingers between lines. The movement is slower than this morning by a measurable degree. Tomorrow it will be slower still. The bubo in your armpit has grown. You can feel it pressing against your ribs with each breath. Not large enough yet to restrict movement, but present enough to announce its continued expansion. By tomorrow morning it will measure 4 centimeters. By day 4 it will be the size of a hen's egg, and the pain will make raising your left arm impossible even for the brief motions transcription requires. You have 36 confessions remaining, 134 hours until the inspector arrives. The arithmetic is simple. You need to maintain current pace through day 4, then increase pace on day 5 to compensate for the handwriting collapse that begins on day 6. This is possible if the fever holds at current temperature. It becomes impossible if the fever spikes early, or if the bubos restrict your movement more than documented progression suggests they should. You finish the midwife's confession as the light fails. The final sentence reads, "I confess before God that I accepted payment for 2 births and not 3, but I deny before God that my skill was insufficient for the 3rd. And I ask penance for pride in defending my competence, when humility before divine will would have been more proper." The theological language is perfect. The midwife understood exactly what the church needed to hear. You have seen this pattern before. Penitents who confessed defensive pride rather than the actual sin they committed, because defensive pride is easier to document and assign penance for than the complicated truth of what happens when children die, and parents need someone to blame besides God. You stand carefully, Testing your balance. The fever has climbed another ½ degree since the physician's visit. Your vision swims briefly, then clears. This is normal for hour 12 of day 2. The swimming becomes permanent on day 5, when the fever reaches the stage that makes sustained focus impossible. The office is dark except for your single candle. The other clerks left at sunset. You are alone with the remaining confessions and the symptom log that now contains 14 entries documenting your methodical dissolution. You close confession 51 and lock it in the cabinet with the others. The key is heavy in your black hand. Tomorrow the key will feel heavier. By day 4 you will need to use both hands to turn it. By day 6 the cabinet will remain unlocked, because fine motor control will have failed entirely, and locked cabinets will be someone else's problem. You blow out the candle and walk home through streets that smell of burning juniper and fear. Someone has painted a red cross on the baker's door, the mark that means plague inside. Stay away, let them die, or recover without your proximity adding to the contagion. You pass the marked door, and do not look at it directly. Marie is waiting at home. The children are asleep, or pretending to be. You have 36 confessions remaining and 134 hours in which to complete them. The door of your house is unmarked. You rest your black hand on the frame for just a moment before entering. Not long enough to transfer any visible stain, but long enough to acknowledge that this house will be marked soon, that the red cross is coming, that Marie knows it and you know it, and the children probably know it too, even though no one speaks about it aloud. Inside, the lamp is burning. Marie has left bread and wine on the table. You sit down and break the bread with your pink hand, leaving the black one in your lap where the shadows hide it. The wine tastes sour. You drink it anyway, without the theriac the physician prescribed, because you need to maintain exact fever progression, and introducing variables now would corrupt the data. Marie appears in the doorway. She does not ask how many confessions remain. She does not ask about your hand. She simply stands there for a moment, then withdraws. You hear her footsteps on the stairs. You hear the bedroom door close. You finish the bread and climb the stairs slowly, counting each step. 14 steps. Tomorrow there will still be 14 steps, but they will feel like 20. By day 5, they will feel like 40, and you will need to rest halfway up. The bedroom is dark. Marie is already in bed, turned away. You undress in silence and lie down beside her. Your fever makes the sheets feel cold. The axillary node burns steadily. The bobo beneath your jaw has grown large enough that you can feel it when you swallow. You lie still and count the hours until dawn. 6 hours until you must rise and return to the office. 36 confessions remaining. 134 hours until the inspector arrives. Your body is cooperating with the timeline. Your handwriting is still legible. The record will be complete. Marie's breathing deepens into sleep. You remain awake, monitoring your fever, cataloging the pain locations, documenting mentally what you will transfer to written record at dawn. The night is long. The count continues. The inspector is coming, and your dissolving body is racing him to completion, one confession at a time, 1 hour at a time, one measured symptom at a time. The darkness holds. You hold with it. The church bell tolls compline through your window, while you sign confession 46. The signature no longer resembles your name. 3 wavering lines where 6 letters should be, the final mark trailing off like ink running from a wound. You set the quill down and examine the page. The confession text maintains consistent formation despite fever tremors. 15 years of muscle memory holding against physical dissolution. But the signature at the bottom degrades with each iteration. Yesterday's signatures showed recognizable letters. Today's resemble territorial markings, made by something that once understood language but has forgotten the specifics. The confession ledger requires your signature at the bottom of each page to verify ecclesiastical accuracy, which creates the documentation problem that your signature has been degrading for 3 days, and now resembles a chicken's final thought. The Church has not issued guidance on whether degraded signatures indicate heretical handwriting. You pull scrap parchment from the supply drawer and practice. First attempt, 3 lines, no recognizable letters. Second attempt, partial formation of the initial letter before the tremor takes control. Third attempt, something that might pass for your name if examined by candlelight from across the room by someone who has never seen your actual signature. The bell continues its rhythm. You match your practice attempts to the tolling pattern. 1 signature per bell strike, each iteration documenting the progressive loss of motor control with scientific precision. After 12 attempts, patterns emerge. The initial letter maintains some consistency. The middle section collapses entirely. The final letter sometimes resolves into something approaching legibility. You examine the confession ledger's signature requirements. Each page requires verification. 41 pages remain. Your hand produces consistent text but inconsistent signatures, which creates the administrative paradox where your confessions are doctrinally sound but ecclesiastically unverifiable. Brother Domenico's footsteps echo in the stairwell. You cover the practice parchment with your sleeve before he reaches the doorway. "The evening prayers," he says. "I heard the bell." He enters far enough to see the completed confession on your desk but not the signature at the bottom. His gaze moves to your hand, still holding the quill with visible effort. Your grip has changed. The fever affects precision. Precision is what Father Arnaud will examine. He steps closer. "May I see the signature?" You turn the ledger toward him. He studies the mark at the bottom of the page. 3 wavering lines where your name should be. This is what you have been practicing, not a question. He has seen the ink stains on the scrap parchment, despite your attempt to cover them. Motor control degrades predictably. The signature follows documented patterns. Father Arnaud requires legible verification. I am aware of the requirements. Brother Domenico pulls the practice parchment from beneath your sleeve. 12 signatures in varying states of collapse, each one worse than the last, each one documenting the progression with clinical precision. You are recording your own dissolution. Someone should document the timeline accurately. He sets the parchment back on your desk. The inspector arrives in 134 hours. Will your signature remain legible until then? You look at the progression on the practice sheet. 12 attempts showing consistent degradation, each iteration slightly further from recognizable letters. The text maintains consistency, the verification mark does not. Then we have a documentation problem. We have had a documentation problem since the Bobo appeared. This is simply the most recent iteration. Brother Domenico's expression does not change. I will include your signature stability in my evening prayers. Prayer has not stopped the fever. Prayer documents our recognition of forces beyond clerical control. He leaves without further comment. The bell tolls again through the window. You return to the practice parchment and attempt another signature. The result resembles the previous 12 attempts. Partial letter formation, midsection collapse, final mark trailing into nothing. The confession ledger sits beside you. 41 pages remain. 134 hours until inspection. Your signature continues its predictable degradation, each iteration documenting the timeline between documented competence and documented failure. You complete one more practice attempt. The result shows marginal improvement, 4 recognizable letters instead of 3. You note the improvement on the margin of the practice sheet and continue working. The lamp needs oil. You refill it without spilling, which counts as motor control victory. Small confirmations of remaining function. You document them precisely because precision is what remains when strength fails. You begin confession 47 at dawn. The quill feels wrong in your fever grip, heavier than yesterday, requiring conscious effort to hold steady rather than automatic adjustment. The goose feather weighs perhaps 3 grams. Your hand interprets it as 300. The confession belongs to a merchant who diverted grain shipments during famine, his final testimony documenting 14 families who starved while he maintained profit margins. You transcribe the numbers with mechanical precision, despite the quill's impossible weight. Each line requires deliberate pressure to maintain ink flow, each letter forming through conscious effort rather than trained reflex. After 12 lines, your fingers cramp around the shaft. You set the quill down and flex your hand until the cramping subsides. The bubo beneath your jaw has reached 7 centimeters according to this morning's measurement. The swelling distorts your ability to turn your head fully left. You compensate by turning your entire torso when examining the confession scroll, the physical workaround costing additional energy you do not have. You switch to a lighter quill from your backup supply. The replacement weighs perhaps 2 grams, 1/3 less than the original. The reduced weight makes control harder rather than easier. Your hand expects resistance that is not there. The letters form too quickly, bleeding ink into malformed shapes that require scratching out and rewriting. You return to the heavier quill, despite the cramping. Professional habit overriding physical comfort. The familiar weight provides an anchor of routine in the accelerating dissolution of motor control. Better to work slowly with consistent results than quickly with corrected errors. Guy de Chauliac measured your fever at 104 degrees last evening. The bubo's expansion follows documented progression, 2 centimeters growth per day, reaching maximum size by day 6 before the hemorrhaging begins. You are on day 4. The timeline allows 72 hours of deteriorating but functional transcription before complete motor collapse. The merchant's confession runs longer than most. His testimony includes specific dates, quantities, and family names of those who starved. You document each detail with clinical precision, the quill growing heavier with each completed line, but the text maintaining consistent formation. 15 years of clerical training holding against 4 days of plague progression. Marie's footsteps sound in the hallway. She enters carrying bread that you cannot eat due to throat swelling. She sets it beside the ledger anyway. The ritual of care maintained despite its practical uselessness. Your hand is shaking. The fever reached 104 degrees. Can you still write? The text remains legible. The effort increases. She examines the completed portions of Confession 47. The handwriting shows rightward slant and occasional tremor but maintains readable formation. Father Arnaud will examine every letter. I am aware of his methodology. 40 confessions remain, 130 hours until inspection. She pulls the lighter quill from where you discarded it. Why not use the easier tool? The lighter quill produces inconsistent results. Professional standards require consistent formation, regardless of physical cost. She sets the lighter quill back in the supply jar. You are choosing difficulty. I am choosing accuracy. Marie leaves without further comment. You return to the merchant's confession, the quill requiring both conscious grip pressure and deliberate stroke control to maintain legible formation. The cramping returns after 20 lines. You work through it without pause. Documentation standards overriding comfort. Professional competence maintained through deliberate effort when automatic function fails. The confession requires 43 lines to complete. You sign at the bottom using controlled tremor, 4 recognizable letters instead of yesterday's 3. Marginal improvement documented with clinical precision. The quill sits beside the finished page. 3 grams of goose feather interpreted as molten lead by fever-compromised nerves. You flex your fingers and begin Confession 48. Brother Domenico's footsteps echo up the stairwell at dawn, his arrival timed to morning prayers. He carries communion wafers wrapped in linen, the ritual offering brought daily despite your throat swelling making consumption impossible since day 3. He unwraps the linen and places 3 wafers on your desk beside the confession ledger. The wafers are thin, unleavened, consecrated at yesterday's Mass. They should dissolve on the tongue within seconds. Your tongue no longer reaches the roof of your mouth due to submandibular pressure from the bubo pressing against your esophagus. Brother Domenico brings communion wafers that you cannot swallow due to throat swelling, creating the theological paradox where the body of Christ cannot physically enter the body of a dying clerk. He leaves the wafers on the desk where they absorb ambient fever moisture and become documentation of humidity rather than salvation. The sacrament is offered, he says. The sacrament is received with gratitude despite anatomical limitation. God's grace does not require successful consumption. God's grace has not clarified the theological status of wafers that remain uneaten due to plague-induced throat closure. Brother Domenico does not smile. He never smiles. The intention sanctifies the offering. The inspector will not audit intentions, he will audit completed sacraments. Father Arno examines confession records, not communion logs. Father Arno examines everything that documents clerical function. 3 days of unconsumed wafers constitute evidence of incomplete sacramental practice. Brother Domenico's expression shifts, minimal change, barely detectable, the slight tightening around his eyes that indicates theological consideration. You are concerned about documentation of failed communion. I am concerned about documentation of anything that suggests negligence. The wafers remain uneaten. The record shows daily delivery. The gap between delivery and consumption creates questions. He gathers the 3 wafers from your desk. Then I will record that communion was offered and declined due to medical limitation beyond clerical control. Medical limitation during plague time is not recognized as valid excuse for incomplete sacraments. The papal decree of March categorized all gaps in religious practice as potential evidence of heretical doubt. You are not doubting. You are physically incapable of swallowing. The distinction may not survive ecclesiastical review. Brother Domenico re-wraps the wafers in linen but does not take them with him. He places the bundle beside your inkwell where the fever-heated air from your body will reach them. Then they remain here as witness to offered grace. What happens to them after offering is between you and God. He begins the morning prayer without waiting for response. You bow your head and listen to the Latin phrases while the wafers sit beside your work. Small circles of unleavened bread, slowly absorbing the moisture that radiates from your fever-heated skin. The prayer concludes. Brother Domenico's footsteps fade down the stairwell. You return to Confession 48, a washerwoman who stole clothing from plague dead, her final testimony listing 37 garments taken over 6 weeks. The communion wafers remain beside your inkwell. After 2 hours they have visibly softened, the dry bread pulling humidity from the air, the sacred elements becoming hygrometer, measuring the moisture content of your dissolution, with more precision than theological comfort. You do not move them. They document something. The gap between offered sacrament and received grace, between ritual intention and physical capability, between the body of Christ and the body of a dying clerk who can no longer open his throat enough to receive it. The washerwoman's confession requires 31 lines. You complete it with steady hand, the text maintaining consistent formation despite the wafers softening beside you, their gradual dampening a peripheral awareness that does not stop your transcription but changes the quality of the silence in which you work. You flex your left hand and the skin refuses to move naturally. The black discoloration has spread from forearm to knuckles overnight. The flesh now the precise color of plums, 3 days past market sale. You hold the hand beside the confession. Scroll and compare. Parchment maintains its ivory tone. Your skin has abandoned any pretense of living tissue coloration. Marie will notice. The calculation is simple. She visits at Vespers with bread and watered wine, stands beside your desk while you transcribe, watches your hands form letters with the attention mothers develop for children who lie poorly. You have kept your left arm beneath the desk for 4 days. Today the positioning will not hide what has happened to your fingers. 39 confessions completed since you discovered the bubo. 48 pending. Inspector arrives in 4 days. The progression mathematics are precise. Your efficiency drops 15% per day, based on documented cases you have transcribed. Yesterday you completed 9 entries. Today you will complete 7. Tomorrow, 6. The day after, 4. The day the inspector arrives, you will produce approximately 2 completed confessions before your hand stops cooperating entirely. 48 confessions require approximately 7 days at current degradation rate. You have 4 days until inspection. The gap will be 13 entries minimum. 13 families whose final words remain untranscribed. 13 pieces of evidence that prove clerical negligence during plague time, which proves abandonment of duty, which proves heretical disregard for dying souls, which costs Marie her housing. You open confession 49 and begin writing. The quill feels heavier than yesterday. Your grip compensates by increasing pressure, which accelerates hand fatigue, which reduces legible output per hour. The efficiency spiral tightens mechanically. The confession belongs to a tailor who accepted payment for a merchant's funeral shroud, but died before completing the commission, leaving the merchant's body wrapped in unfinished linen, with visible basting stitches. The tailor's guilt centers on professional incompletion, rather than the standard litany of pride and lust. You transcribe his words with precise notation, while your blackened hand forms letters that remain legible, despite the flesh losing its capacity for fine motor control. Brother Domenico's footsteps echo up the stairwell at none. He carries no wafers today. He stops in your doorway and his gaze moves to your left hand, still holding the quill, still forming letters, still transcribing confession 49 with steady formation despite the visible evidence of tissue death spreading toward your wrist. You should rest, he says. I should complete the ledger. The ledger is not more important than... The inspector arrives in 4 days. The ledger is exactly as important as Marie keeping her housing. He steps into the room. His gaze remains on your hand. Can you still write? Yes. For how much longer? You set down the quill and flex your fingers. The movement is slower than this morning. 3 days. Maybe 4 if the progression follows documented patterns. Maybe 2 if it accelerates. And the inspector arrives before I finish. The arithmetic is clear. Brother Domenico moves to your desk and counts the scrolls in your pending stack. His lips move silently through the calculation. You need to write 13 confessions per day. 14. I'm losing efficiency. That's not possible. No. He looks at the confession you are transcribing. The tailor's guilt about unfinished work rendered in your increasingly difficult handwriting. You need to tell Marie. I need to complete the ledger. You need to tell her before the inspector discovers the gaps and evicts her family based on my documented negligence. Yes. I understand the sequence. You pick up the quill and return to the tailor's confession. I will tell her when the mathematics change. Brother Domenico remains in the doorway. His silence carries the weight of theological certainty that prayers matter more than documentation. You continue writing. The black discoloration on your hand extends past your wrist now, visible even when you attempt to angle your arm away from direct light. He leaves without offering prayers. His footsteps descend more slowly than they rose. You complete confession 49 by the angle of light that marks mid-afternoon. Your hand cramps twice during transcription. Both times you pause, flex your fingers, wait for the sensation to pass, then continue. The cramping adds approximately 6 minutes per confession to your completion time. 6 minutes multiplied by 47 remaining confessions equals 4 hours and 42 minutes of additional labor your schedule cannot absorb. The efficiency mathematics are tightening. You begin confession 50 while the window light shifts toward evening angle. Your left hand forms letters that slant slightly rightward compared to yesterday's entries. The slant is visible, measurable, progressive. The same rightward drift that appears in every clerk's final week, according to the 263 cases you have documented since March. The confession belongs to a baker's apprentice who sold bread made from flour mixed with ground chalk to extend supply during shortage. His guilt focuses on the specific ratio, 1 part chalk to 4 parts flour, and whether the dilution constitutes theft or practical necessity during plague economics. You transcribe his measurements with exact notation while your hand continues its measurable dissolution. Marie's footsteps sound in the stairwell at Vespers. Her rhythm is steady, familiar, carrying bread and wine up 3 flights while the street below fills with cartwheels and evening bells. You keep your left hand beneath the desk and continue writing with your right. The positioning is natural, unsuspicious, maintained successfully for 4 days. She enters and sets the bread beside your ink pot. Her gaze moves to your face, then to your visible right hand, then to the space beneath your desk, where your left arm rests in calculated concealment. "Show me your hand," she says. The street noise continues below, cartwheels on cobblestones, the baker's apprentice confession, half complete on your desk. You raise your left hand into the window light. The black discoloration extends from fingertips to mid-forearm, the skin transformed into the exact shade of spoiled fruit, the tissue announcing its systematic failure with medical precision. Marie's face does not change expression. She has seen this color before. Everyone in Avignon has seen this color before. "How long?" she asks. 4 days until the inspector arrives, maybe 3 days until I can't write legibly. "I meant, how long have you been hiding it?" 4 days. She touches the bread, adjusts its position on your desk, does not look at your hand again. "You should have told me immediately. I needed to complete as many confessions as possible before I started planning what happens after the inspection." "Yes." She moves to your pending stack and counts the scrolls without touching them. Her lips move through the same calculation Brother Domenico performed earlier. The mathematics are visible to anyone who understands deadline pressure and physical degradation rates. "You can't finish," she says. "No." "How many will you complete?" 35, maybe 37 if the cramping doesn't accelerate. The inspector will find 11 to 13 gaps in the ledger. "Which costs us housing." "Which costs you housing. I won't be here for the eviction." She sits on the stool beside your desk. Her hands rest in her lap, with the stillness of someone who has already calculated every possible outcome and found none acceptable. "Then we leave before the inspection." "Leave where? With what money? Using which roads while plague closes every city gate from here to Lyon?" "We find something." You find corpse hauler work in a city that produces 40 bodies per day and can't process them fast enough. You find grace housing in parishes that have lost half their clergy to the same fever killing their congregations. You find gigs. We find something that isn't waiting for ecclesiastical eviction. You return to the baker's apprentice confession. Your left hand forms letters that maintain legible structure, despite the visible tissue death spreading toward your elbow. "I have 3 days to complete as many entries as possible," When my hand stops cooperating, I write you a letter explaining the strategic gaps. You present the letter during inspection. The documented illness provides ecclesiastical justification for incomplete work. Maybe the inspector grants extension. Maybe you keep housing while the replacement clerk finishes transcription. Maybe. Better than leaving immediately, with no documentation and no plan. She touches the bread again. Does not offer it. You're writing me a letter that explains why you couldn't finish your job, because plague killed you first. You think the inspector cares about your strategic planning. I think the inspector cares about documented justification for clerical gaps during plague time. The letter provides evidence that I maintained professional competence until physical dissolution prevented completion. The letter provides evidence that you hid your infection and continued working instead of reporting immediately to church authorities. You flex your blackened fingers. The movement is slower than 10 minutes ago. The letter provides evidence that I prioritized ledger completion over personal survival, which proves devotion rather than negligence. Marie stands and moves to the window. The evening light catches her profile. You're going to die transcribing confessions for people who are already dead, hoping your documentation protects my housing after you're gone. This is your final plan. Yes. The street noise continues below. She does not turn from the window. Then finish your confession. I'll bring more bread tomorrow. She leaves without touching the watered wine. You complete the baker's apprentice confession by full darkness. Your hand cramps 3 times during the final paragraph. Confession 51 belongs to a dyer whose hands turned permanent indigo from 20 years of woad processing. He died clutching his profession stain, fingers the color of expensive cloth while his lungs filled with fluid. His final guilt concerns whether the dye residue made his corpse unsuitable for consecrated burial, whether chemical contamination of flesh constitutes desecration of God's temple. You transcribe his concern while your own blackened hand demonstrates a different form of professional marking. The parallel is unavoidable. His indigo, your necrosis. Both hands transformed by labor, both bodies announcing their work through irreversible discoloration. You note his occupation and symptoms with standard notation. The entry requires 43 lines. Your hand cramps on line 18. You pause. Flex your fingers against the desk edge until sensation returns. Continue. The cramp adds 7 minutes to completion time. Yesterday, the same entry length required 31 minutes. Today, 38. Tomorrow, the calculation will shift again. Father Arnaud's inspection protocol requires complete documentation of occupational deaths. The dyer's indigo hands must be noted with precise color terminology, permanent blue-black staining of palmar and dorsal surfaces, penetrating beneath epidermal layer, consistent with prolonged woad exposure. The description takes 6 lines. Your handwriting maintains legible formation despite the tissue death visible on the hand forming the letters. The window light reaches morning angle. 8 hours until Marie's next visit. 47 confessions remaining. 3 days until your hand stops cooperating with sufficient reliability for ecclesiastical documentation standards. You begin confession 52 without pausing for water. The confession belongs to a notary who falsified property boundaries to favor a merchant client, moving a shared wall by 8 inches on official documents to resolve an inheritance dispute. His guilt centers on the precision of the deception. 8 inches chosen because it fell within measurement error tolerance, making the forgery technically undetectable while legally consequential. You document his measurements with exact notation. 8 inches. The same attention to marginal advantage you're applying to your own dissolution timeline. You are moving boundaries between acceptable and fraudulent documentation, calculating exactly how much degradation the inspector will tolerate before declaring the ledger invalid. The notary's strategy failed when both parties died of plague. Before the dispute reached ecclesiastical court, his forgery became irrelevant. Your calculation may prove similarly meaningless if Father Arnaud's incorruptibility operates as documented. You complete the notary's confession by the bells of terce. Your efficiency is holding at 7 entries per day. The mathematics remain unchanged. Brother Domenico's footsteps sound in the stairwell. He carries dampening wafers. The rotation has resumed. He enters and places 3 wafers beside your inkpot without comment, his gaze moving to your left hand with the careful attention of someone documenting progressive failure. "Marie told me about your plan," he says. "Then you understand why I need to continue working. I understand why you think documentation matters more than final confession." You dip your quill and begin confession 53. Documentation protects Marie. Final confession protects my soul. The timeline allows one. The timeline is killing you. The plague is killing me. The timeline is a consequence. He moves to your window and looks down at the street below. A corpse cart passes. The wheels sound different when loaded. A heavier friction, more resistance against cobblestones. Father Arnaud built his career prosecuting clerical negligence during the Inquisition. He has never granted extension for incomplete records. I know. I documented his service record. Then you know your letter won't matter. The letter establishes that I maintained professional competence until physical dissolution prevented completion. It transforms the gap from negligence into documented medical incapacity. It transforms the gap from your failure into Marie's problem. Brother Domenico turns from the window. You're asking her to present evidence of your plague death to an inspector who specializes in finding doctrinal violations in dying clerks' final work. You think he'll show mercy. I think he'll follow protocol. Protocol requires documented justification for incomplete work. The letter provides justification. Protocol requires complete ledgers. You're 3 days from hand failure with 47 confessions pending. The mathematics are not in your favor. You set down the quill and flex your blackened fingers. The movement is measurably slower than this morning. No. Brother Domenico remains by the window. His silence carries theological weight. Finally, I can transcribe some entries. My handwriting won't match yours, but the inspector might accept. The inspector will identify the handwriting change immediately and declare the ledger fraudulent. Different hands constitute evidence of collaborative deception rather than documented illness. Then, what do you want me to do? Bring wafers. Maintain the rotation. Let me work. He leaves the wafers and descends without offering prayers. You return to confession 53. The entry belongs to a physician who treated plague patients with theriac compound. 64 ingredients mixed according to Roman formula, applied as both prevention and cure, effective in 0 documented cases. His guilt concerns whether prescribing useless medicine during plague constitutes fraud, or simply the limits of medical knowledge. You transcribe his justification, while your own body demonstrates the same professional helplessness. You have begun confusing your handwriting with illuminated scripture, which means confession entries occasionally feature decorative capitals that spell out symptom progressions. The letter H for hemorrhage now includes gold leaf detail you do not remember applying. This is either delirium or unprecedented clerical artistry. The confession requires 51 lines. Your hand cramps twice. Completion time, 42 minutes. The efficiency degradation is accelerating. You complete 3 more entries before the window light shifts to afternoon angle. Confessions 54 through 56. A midwife who lost 3 mothers during a single night's labor. A carpenter who sold coffins at triple rate during peak mortality. A priest who abandoned his parish when half the congregation died in 1 week. You document their guilt with standard notation, while your hand announces its systematic failure through progressive cramping and rightward slant. Marie's footsteps sound in the stairwell at Vespers. She carries bread and wine. The rhythm is unchanged. She enters and sets the bread beside your ink pot. Her gaze moves to your left hand, now darker than yesterday, the discoloration spreading past your elbow toward your shoulder. How many did you complete? 7. How many left? 44. She counts the days on her fingers. You need to complete 15 per day to finish before the inspector arrives. Yes. Your efficiency is dropping. Yes. She sits on the stool beside your desk. The bread remains untouched between you. The letter won't work. It establishes documented justification. It establishes that you hid your infection for 4 days while continuing to handle confession records, which proves you prioritized paperwork over reporting plague exposure to church authorities. Father Arnaud will use the letter as evidence that you violated health protocols during a pandemic. You flex your fingers. The movement is difficult. Then what do you suggest? Stop writing. Rest. Let me find work before the inspection. You'll find corpse hauler positions that pay in plague exposure and grace housing that evicts you when the parish loses its priest. The calculation is better than waiting for ecclesiastical eviction while you die transcribing confessions that won't matter. The street noise continues below. Cartwheels and evening bells. They matter, you say. Marie stands and moves to the window. To who? The people who confessed are dead. The families who might read them are dead or fleeing. The church that employed you will evict me, regardless of your documentation. Who are you writing for? For the record. For the evidence that their final words were witnessed and preserved. For your professional pride. For the work. She turns from the window. Her face shows the expression of someone who has exhausted all arguments and found none effective. Then finish your work. I'll bring more bread tomorrow. She leaves without touching the wine. You complete confession 56 by full darkness. Your hand cramps 4 times during the final paragraph. The quill feels heavier than yesterday. The window has gone black, and you can hear the evening patrol calling hours through streets that smell of quicklime and smoke. Confession 57 belongs to a grain merchant who hoarded wheat during the first month of plague, waiting for prices to rise before releasing supply. The strategy worked until he died of fever in his own warehouse, surrounded by unsold inventory while the city paid triple rate to merchants with less strategic patience. His guilt concerns whether market timing constitutes sin when the commodity is survival itself. You transcribe his calculations while performing your own. The merchant's arithmetic was sound. Scarcity drives price. Delayed supply maximizes profit. His error was biological rather than economic. Plague operates faster than market cycles. Your error is similar. The dissolution timeline is outpacing your completion capacity. You calculated based on average degradation rates, but your body is accelerating past the median curve. Yesterday you completed 7 entries. Today you will complete 6 if the cramping frequency remains stable, tomorrow 5, the day after 3 or 4. 44 confessions remaining. 3 days of declining capacity. The gap widens with mechanical precision. The grain merchant's confession requires 39 lines. Your hand cramps on line 12, again on line 27, again on line 36. Each cramp adds minutes to your completion time. The efficiency spiral tightens with the same inevitability the merchant faced in his warehouse. You finish the entry and set down the quill. Your left hand rests on the desk beside the parchment. The black discoloration has spread past your elbow. The skin feels different now, tighter, less responsive to voluntary movement. You flex your fingers, and the response is delayed, as if the signal must travel through damaged tissue before reaching muscle. The window light marks morning. Brother Domenico will arrive at none with wafers. Marie will arrive at vespers with bread. The rotation continues while your capacity dissolves. You begin Confession 58 without pausing. The confession belongs to a copyist who introduced errors into a Salter commission. Minor misspellings, transposed letters, dropped words, because the client negotiated payment downward after work commenced. His sabotage was precise enough to be plausibly attributed to scribal fatigue, rather than deliberate fraud. His guilt centers on whether intentional degradation of holy text constitutes heresy or justified labor action. You document his technique while recognizing the parallel. Your handwriting is degrading. The rightward slant is visible across multiple entries. The letter formation shows measurable deterioration. An inspector comparing your recent work to entries from 2 weeks ago will identify the decline immediately. The question is whether the degradation appears intentional or medical. Whether Father Arnault will interpret the slant as evidence of negligence or evidence of documented plague progression. The copyist's confession provides no answer. He died before the client discovered the errors. His sabotage remained undetected. Your degradation will be examined by an inspector who built his career identifying exactly this pattern in dying clerks' final documentation. You complete Confession 58 by the bells of Terce. Completion time, 49 minutes. Yesterday the same entry length required 38 minutes. The progression is measurable. Brother Domenico arrives with watering and dampening supplies. He places 3 wafers beside your inkpot and stands beside your desk, his gaze moving between your blackened hand and the confession scroll. Your handwriting is changing, he says. Yes. The inspector will notice. Yes. He'll interpret it as evidence of declining competence, or evidence of documented plague progression. The interpretation depends on whether he believes I maintained professional standards until physical dissolution prevented continuation. Brother Domenico picks up Confession 57 and examines your handwriting. The slant is visible, the letter formation is degrading. This looks like a clerk who should have stopped working 2 days ago. This looks like a clerk who prioritized ledger completion over personal comfort. This looks like a clerk who violated health protocols by continuing to handle confession records while visibly infected. You dip your quill and begin Confession 59. Then the letter needs to establish that I reported symptoms immediately but continued working with ecclesiastical permission to prevent ledger gaps. You didn't report symptoms immediately. The letter will say I did. Brother Domenico sets down the confession scroll. You're asking me to support documentation fraud during an inspector's audit. I'm asking you to witness that I maintained professional competence until the day my hand stopped cooperating. The timeline is adjustable. The timeline is a lie. The timeline is strategic documentation of essentially accurate events, presented in the sequence most favorable to Marie's housing stability. The room is silent except for the scratch of your quill on parchment. Brother Domenico remains beside your desk. I won't testify to false timelines, he says finally. Then don't. The letter will stand alone. He leaves without collecting the wafers from yesterday. You complete 4 more confessions before the window light shifts to afternoon angle. Confessions 59 through 62. A tavern keeper who watered wine at 2-to-1 ratio during plague shortage. A mason who accepted payment for tomb construction but used cheaper stone than contracted. A widow who sold her dead husband's tools before his debts were settled. A baker who kept his shop open 3 days after his daughter showed symptoms. Each confession documents the small frauds plague economics produced. Each entry shows your degrading handwriting. The evidence accumulates with mechanical precision. Your hand cramps 6 times during Confession 62. The frequency is increasing. Yesterday you managed 7 entries with 8 total cramps. Today you have completed 6 entries with 14 cramps. The ratio is shifting past sustainable levels. Marie's footsteps sound in the stairwell at Vespers. The rhythm is unchanged. She enters and sets bread and wine beside your inkpot. Her gaze moves to your hand, then to the completed confessions stacked beside your desk. How many? 6. You completed 7 yesterday. Yesterday my hand cramped 8 times total, today 14 times in 6 entries. The frequency is accelerating. She sits on the stool and counts the pending scrolls. 41 left. 2.5 days until inspection. Yes. The mathematics are worse. Yes. She breaks the bread and offers half. You take it with your right hand. The left rests on the desk, darkened past your shoulder now, the discoloration spreading with visible daily progression. Brother Domenico told me about the letter, she says. He disagrees with the timeline. He says you're planning to lie about when symptoms started. I'm planning to document events in the sequence most favorable to your housing stability. Marie sets down her bread untouched. You're planning to commit documentation fraud during a papal inspector's audit, using a letter that claims you reported plague symptoms immediately, while every visible piece of evidence proves you hid infection for 4 days. The letter establishes that I prioritize duty over. The letter establishes that you're asking me to present falsified medical documentation to an inspector who prosecutes exactly this type of fraud. Father Arnaud built his career identifying dying clerks who manipulate records. You think he won't recognize a strategic timeline when he reads one? The evening bells sound through the window. The street below fills with cartwheels and closing shop shutters. You eat the bread slowly. The act of chewing requires concentration now. What do you want me to do, you ask? Marie stands and moves to your pending stack. She runs her finger along the scroll edges, counting without touching. I want you to stop calculating, stop strategizing, stop trying to protect me with documentation that will make everything worse. Then, what protects you after I'm gone? Nothing. We lose housing. I find work. Thomas learns corpse hauling is a profession. We survive or we don't. That's not a plan. Neither is dying while writing a letter that proves you violated health protocols. She turns from the scrolls. You have 2 days left before your hand stops working. Maybe 3. You're going to spend that time transcribing confessions for dead people instead of writing me something honest. The window light has faded to evening angle. Your completed stack sits beside the pending scrolls. 6 entries today. 41 remaining. The mathematics are visible. I don't know what honest looks like anymore, you say. Marie picks up the wine and drinks, sets the cup down, then keep writing your confessions. I'll bring bread tomorrow. She leaves. You sit at your desk while the room darkens. Your left hand rests on the wood, black from fingertips to shoulder, the tissue announcing its systematic failure through color change and progressive immobility. The confession scrolls wait in their stack, 41 voices documented in death, waiting for your dissolving hand to transcribe them into permanent record. You light the lamp and begin confession 63. The priority stack holds 43 entries. The secondary stack holds 31. You sort them by family connection, because that is what determines which confessions reach the archive, which ones Father Guillaume Arnaud will examine for completeness, and which ones will simply disappear into the category of casualties, too numerous to document individually. A tanner's wife with no cardinal patronage goes to secondary. A merchant with papal connections goes to priority. The sorting takes 17 minutes and creates its own ethical calculus that you document nowhere. Guy de Chauliac arrives at none, carrying his leather case and a wooden drawing board you have not seen before. Permission to record, he says. You look up from confession 51. The bubo beneath your jaw has reached 9 centimeters, the one in your armpit measures 7. And the discoloration has spread in symmetrical patterns that apparently qualify as noteworthy. Record what? He sets the board on the corner of your desk, away from the parchment. Your buboes have achieved textbook presentation, bilateral symmetry. Classic discoloration progression. The morphological development follows every documented stage with unusual precision. You dip the quill. Permission for what, specifically? Sketches. For my treatise on plague morphology. He opens the case. Charcoal pencils. Measuring calipers. A notebook, with anatomical diagrams already drafted. You are apparently becoming medical literature, while still conscious enough to grant copyright. You complete the sentence you were writing. The tanner's wife confessed to selling leather claimed as cowhide but actually goat skin, a deception that technically constitutes fraud but practically represents survival pricing during material shortage, then set down the quill. How long? 15 minutes, 20 if you permit measurement notation. The fever makes calculation difficult, but 15 minutes against 120 hours remaining produces acceptable cost. You tilt your head left, exposing the primary bubo. Guy moves closer with the calipers. Metal touches swollen skin. You continue reading Confession 51 while he measures. The tanner's wife's voice describing how she justified the leather substitution to herself as quality equivalence rather than material deception. How her confessor disagreed with sufficient force that she sought a second clerical opinion, which Father Arnaud's audit will flag as suspicious confession shopping. 9.2 centimeters at widest point, Guy says. Discoloration extends 4.7 centimeters beyond the swelling border. The progression matches day 5 parameters exactly. He sketches. Charcoal on paper. The sound softer than quill on parchment but following similar rhythm. You complete the tanner's wife's entry. Fraud confessed. Penance assigned. Absolution granted with theological reservation about the confession shopping pattern. And move to Confession 52, while Guy de Chauliac documents the physical evidence of your dissolution with clinical enthusiasm, that suggests he finds bilateral symmetry more interesting than most people find sunsets. The axillary bubo shows identical morphology, he says, measuring your armpit while you transcribe a baker who sold underweight loaves during the March grain shortage. 7.1 centimeters. The symmetry is remarkable. Most cases show uneven development. You write steadily. The baker's confession runs 4 paragraphs, complicated by his theological question about whether short waiting during famine constitutes theft or resource optimization, a distinction his confessor apparently spent 18 minutes clarifying before assigning penance. Your hand maintains formation. The rightward slant has stabilized at 12 degrees, degraded from your normal 7 but still functional for documentation purposes. Guy completes his sketch of the axillary bubo and returns to the primary neck swelling. The discoloration pattern creates almost perfect radial symmetry. I have documented 147 cases. Yours demonstrates the clearest morphological presentation. Congratulations to my buboes. I am serious. The medical value of precise documentation during conscious observation is significant. Most patients reach delirium before achieving this stage of development. He measures again, confirming earlier numbers. You are providing data while experiencing the condition. The dual perspective has research applications. You complete the baker's entry. Confession 52 joins the secondary stack. No cardinal connections, common, penitent classification, which means it reaches the archive only if time permits. Guy completes his second sketch and opens his notebook to a page dense with anatomical notation. The progression timeline, he says. First bubo appeared when? Day 1 morning beneath the jaw. Size at discovery. Approximately 3 centimeters. He writes. Second bubo. Day 2, dawn, left axilla. Size at discovery. 2.5 centimeters. The measurement sequence continues. He documents growth rates, discoloration timing, fever onset correlation, pain threshold changes. You answer while sorting the next confession. A midwife who accepted payment from a family whose infant she could not save, then returned half the fee as conscience compensation, creating an accounting discrepancy her confessor flagged as potential embezzlement rather than ethical complexity. Guy closes his notebook. The documentation is complete. Your case will appear in the morphology chapter with full anatomical illustration. He packs his instruments with the methodical care of someone who has learned that plague-contaminated tools require specific handling protocols. The sketches demonstrate classical presentation. Future physicians will study your buboes as reference standard. Medical immortality through symmetrical swelling. Essentially, he latches the case. I will note in the treatise that observation occurred during active confession transcription. The professional persistence provides useful context about cognitive function maintenance during advanced plague progression. He departs. The sketches remain on your desk beside Confession 53. A wool merchant who manipulated guild weights to increase profit margins. Confessed under pressure from a competitor's accusation. Assigned penance complicated enough to require 2 paragraphs of theological explanation about restitution mathematics versus spiritual absolution. You are now documented in charcoal and measurement notation, your dissolution preserved for future medical reference, while your hand continues transcribing the moral failures of wool merchants. Both archives expand simultaneously. Guy de Chauliac records your physical collapse with scientific precision, while you record the wool merchant's ethical collapse with ecclesiastical precision. And neither documentation prevents what it describes. 119 hours until Father Guillaume Arnaud arrives. You complete Confession 53 and reach for 54. The first blood appears during Confession 54. Small drops on the parchment, red spreading through black ink like wine through water. You stop writing mid-word. A grain merchant confessing to false measure accusations. The sentence incomplete at, claimed the scales were calibrated but actually, and touch your upper lip. Blood on your fingertip. The hemorrhaging your timeline predicted for day 5, arriving exactly on schedule while you document someone else's calibration fraud. You blot the blood with scrap parchment kept for ink errors. The drop has already spread through 3 words. Calibrated but actually, now illegible beneath the red stain. You rewrite the phrase on a clean line, compress the spacing to fit the remaining parchment width. Continue. The grain merchant's confession runs 6 paragraphs. You reach the end of paragraph 2 before the next drop falls. This one lands on ecclesiastical, turning the letters into red blur. You blot again. The bleeding increases with each line. Nose hemorrhage, the medical texts call it. Epistaxis, the Latin term Guy de Chauliac would use. Blood vessels rupturing under fever pressure, the body's internal architecture beginning to collapse, while consciousness persists long enough to notice. You complete paragraph 3. The confession describes how the merchant justified false measures as correction for grain moisture weight, a technical argument his confessor rejected as sophisticated theft disguised as mathematical precision. 2 more drops fall during paragraph 4. You keep scrap parchment beside the main sheet now, blotting between sentences. The transcription rhythm interrupted every 12 words by the mechanical necessity of preventing blood from destroying documentary evidence. The fever has reached 105 degrees. You know this without measurement, because your vision narrows at the edges, and the room temperature feels simultaneously freezing and burning. The sensory confusion that appears in every account you have transcribed of day 5 progression. The delirium episodes last longer now. Gaps in conscious memory appearing mid-sentence. Words completed without recollection of writing them. Your continuity fracturing, while the work continues. You finish paragraph 5. The grain merchant's confession concludes with theological complexity about whether intention determines sin classification or whether action alone constitutes the moral fact requiring penance. His confessor assigned 3 months of charitable grain distribution to poor households. The restitution mathematics calculated to balance material harm against spiritual restoration. You transcribe the penance terms precisely despite the blood drops now falling every 8 words. The final paragraph requires 4 blotting interruptions. The parchment margins show red spots like plague markers, documentation bearing physical evidence of the transcription conditions. You complete the entry. Grain fraud confessed, theologically complex penance assigned, absolution granted with calculation precision, and move confession 54 to the secondary stack. Common merchant, no cardinal connections. Archive priority, conditional. Confession 55 belongs to a physician who prescribed ineffective plague remedies, while claiming divine authority for treatments he knew carried no medical basis. The confession runs 9 paragraphs because the theological implications of fraudulent healing claims during divine punishment require extensive doctrinal analysis. You begin transcribing. The physician confessed to recommending bloodletting, herbal compounds, and prayer sequences he privately believed were useless, continuing the prescription pattern because admitting helplessness would have undermined his practice income. The hemorrhaging intensifies. You blot after every 6 words now. The scrap parchment pile grows beside your desk, each piece marked with red evidence of your body's systematic failure to maintain basic vascular integrity. The delirium arrives during paragraph 6. You are writing about the physician's theological defense, that providing false hope during plague constitutes pastoral mercy rather than medical fraud, when consciousness fragments. The next awareness. Paragraph 7 is complete. 3 sentences you do not remember writing. The handwriting matches your degraded standard. The theological content is accurate. Your hand apparently continued working while your mind briefly stopped tracking its own existence. You complete paragraph 8. The physician's confessor assigned lifetime penance, public admission of treatment ineffectiveness, restitution to surviving families where possible, and documented acknowledgement that his practice constituted comfort provision rather than medical intervention. The theological distinction between useless treatment and harmful fraud required 2 paragraphs of clarification. Another delirium gap during the final paragraph. You are writing the penance terms, then you are signing the entry completion, the middle section existing only as completed text you do not recall producing. The signature shows rightward slant of 14 degrees now. The degradation accelerates. You move confession 55 to secondary stack. Physician. No cardinal connections. The irony of his fraudulent healing claims documented by a dying clerk apparently escapes neither of you, though he is already dead and cannot appreciate the symmetry. 115 hours until the inspector arrives. 82 confessions remain pending. Your nose bleeds every 5 minutes now. The delirium gaps last longer than the conscious periods. The transcription continues because your hand remembers the rhythm, even when your mind cannot track it. You reach for confession 56, a baker who sold bread made from flour mixed with sawdust during the April grain crisis. The theological question, whether famine justifies material adulteration or whether hunger does not exempt sin. Blood drops on the first line. You blot and continue writing. Brother Domenico's footsteps on the stair during confession 58. Slow steps, deliberate rhythm. The sound of someone carrying holy oil and approaching a task he has performed 237 times in 3 months. You continue transcribing. A cooper who sold barrels with concealed cracks, the leakage discovered only after wine storage, creating both material loss and contractual fraud complicated by the timing gap between sale and discovery. The theological question of delayed consequence and moral responsibility runs 4 paragraphs. Brother Domenico enters without knocking. He carries the small wooden case containing chrism oil, prayer book, and the white cloth used for anointing foreheads. The objects of last rites, standard equipment for plague, Death preparation. You have seen him carry this case into 237 rooms. Now he carries it into yours. The sacrament, he says. You complete the sentence you are writing. The Cooper's defense that barrel inspection responsibility belongs to the buyer, rather than the seller, an argument his confessor rejected as commercial sophistication disguising basic fraud. The quill remains in your hand. I am transcribing Confession 58. The sacrament does not wait for confession completion. He opens the case, removes the oil vial. You are on day 6. The respiratory collapse occurs day 7. Last rites precede death, not follow it. You dip the quill, then administer them while I continue working. The timeline permits neither delay. He stares at you for 4 seconds, then nods. Tilt your head forward. You bend over the parchment. Brother Domenico's thumb touches your forehead, oil spreading in the sign of the cross. He begins the prayer. Through this holy anointing may the Lord in his love and mercy help you with the grace of the Holy Spirit, while you transcribe the Cooper's penance terms. 2 years of public acknowledgement of fraudulent practice. Restitution calculated at 140% of original sale price to account for compound damage. The sacrament continues. Brother Domenico anoints your hands, your voice, the standard sequence for dying penitents. His prayer rhythm overlaps with your transcription rhythm, creating the unusual circumstance where you receive sacramental absolution while simultaneously documenting someone else's sins. The Church has not clarified whether this counts as multitasking or heretical efficiency. May the Lord who frees you from sin save you and raise you up. Brother Domenico completes the forehead anointing. You complete the Cooper's confession entry, the 2 ritual completions occurring simultaneously at your scriptorium desk. You move Confession 58 to secondary stack and reach for 59 without pausing. A weaver who claimed wool content in fabric that contained 30% linen substitution. The fraud undetected for 8 months until summer humidity revealed differential fabric behavior. Brother Domenico anoints your hands. Do you wish to confess before receiving the sacrament? I confessed yesterday, Father Michel. The standard clerical confession, covering pride, doubt, and insufficient prayer discipline. You transcribe the weaver's justification, that fabric performance mattered more than material purity. A utilitarian argument his confessor rejected as moral relativism. The confession is documented. You may verify with Father Michel, if sacramental propriety requires confirmation. He anoints your chest through your robe. Your sister knows. Marie knows I am documenting confessions with professional precision, while dying of professionally documented plague, yes. She brought bread this morning. She did not mention the sacrament timing. She asked me to tell you he closes the oil vial, that the children are prepared, that she understands the housing situation, that you should stop working and rest. You complete the weaver's 3rd paragraph, theological analysis of material substitution versus functional equivalence in commercial transactions. A distinction requiring canon law reference and doctrinal precedent citation. Tell her I completed 81 confessions in 6 days, that the remaining 6 will be finished before Father Guillaume Arnaud arrives, that the ledger gaps are strategic rather than negligent, that she should not open the sealed letter in my desk, unless the inspector questions the family's housing eligibility. Brother Domenico packs the chrism case. The sacrament is complete. Your soul is prepared for death. Good. My hand is prepared for 6 more confessions. You transcribe the weaver's penance, public fabric content disclosure, restitution at replacement cost, 3 years of documented honest practice before guild certification renewal. The 2 preparations can coexist without theological conflict. He stands beside your desk for 11 seconds. Then departs. The stairwell echoes his descent, the sound fading while you complete Confession 59 and reach for Confession 60. A fishmonger who sold spoiled catch as fresh during the June heat, The illness consequence is documented but deaths unproven, creating evidentiary questions about causation versus correlation in sin classification. Your soul theoretically prepared for death, your hand continuing toward ledger completion. The disconnect between spiritual readiness and professional persistence creating its own theological paradox that Brother Domenico's prayer book apparently does not address. 108 hours until the inspector arrives. 6 confessions pending. The hemorrhaging continues every 4 minutes now. The fever has reached the stage where temperature becomes abstract concept rather than measured quantity. The delirium gaps last longer than the conscious periods. You transcribe the fishmonger's confession with hands anointed for burial and mind focused on documentary completion. The last rites complete. The final entries not yet begun. The collision between sacramental conclusion and professional obligation, resolved by ignoring it entirely, and continuing to write. The fishmonger confessed under pressure from witnesses who became ill after purchasing his catch. The theological complexity. Whether illness causation constitutes murder or negligence. Whether intent determines classification. Whether the confession's coerced nature affects its sacramental validity. 7 paragraphs of doctrinal analysis. You transcribe them precisely while your body, officially prepared for death, continues the mechanical work of staying conscious long enough to finish. Blood drops on paragraph 5. You blot without stopping. The quill moves. The hand remembers what the mind increasingly cannot track. The work continues, because stopping would acknowledge that the sacrament's spiritual preparation has already declared your professional function complete. You complete confession 60 and reach for 61. A candlemaker who substituted tallow for beeswax in church candles sold at beeswax prices. The fraud discovered when smoke smell differed from traditional church incense, creating both commercial deception and mild sacrilege requiring compound theological analysis. The transcription continues. Last rites administered. Final confessions pending. The distinction between the two completion states apparently yours alone to maintain through pure clerical stubbornness that Brother Domenico's prayers cannot override. You reach confession 58, and the parchment before you shows no defect, no smudge, no reason to omit it. The merchant whose final words Brother Domenico transcribed confessed to charging interest on grain loans during famine, a sin common enough that the theological language writes itself. You could complete this entry in 12 minutes. Your hand knows the formation pattern. The quill holds enough ink for 400 words without refill. You set the parchment aside unmarked. Not because the confession lacks weight, because the merchant family holds no cardinal connections, employs no papal clerks, maintains no documentation that Father Guillaume Arnaud will cross-reference against archdiocesan records. The entry matters for the merchant's soul already judged. It does not matter for your family's housing. You are rationing consciousness now. Every completed entry costs motor control you will not recover. The inspector arrives in 72 hours, and the ledger contains 29 confessions requiring documentation. You have enough handwriting precision remaining for perhaps 22 entries, if the tremor progression follows the pattern you have observed in 47 dying clerks before you. 22 entries completed means 7 strategic gaps. 7 families whose final confessions will remain untranscribed because their social position offers no protection value, whose sins matter less than the sins of those connected to Cardinal Etienne Aubert's household, whose absolution the Church granted but whose documentation you are now choosing to omit. You record the decision in your personal symptom log with the same clinical precision you have maintained since the first bubo appeared. The notation reads, Entry 59 omitted. Family classification, common merchant. Cardinal connections, none verified. Strategic value for inspection purposes, minimal. Energy conservation, critical for priority entries. Theological justification, Absolution already granted. Documentation serves administrative rather than sacramental function. The logic is sound, the notation is complete. You have transformed documentation negligence into strategic triage, clerical failure into family protection mechanism, the gap in the ledger now serving a purpose. Father Guillaume Arnaud will never recognize, because he will see only incompletion where you have created calculated mercy. The confession ledger sits before you with its first intentional omission, entry 59 remaining blank, while entry 60 waits, with its cardinal connected penitent, whose confession you will transcribe with whatever motor control remains, because that entry protects Marie, protects her children, protects the housing that depends on your documented competence rather than your actual survival. You have stopped being faithful transcriber. You have become strategic editor, your professional identity adapting to serve family survival rather than ecclesiastical completeness. The distinction between the two now clear enough that you can document it in notation that whoever inherits this desk will read and understand, or will read and condemn depending on whether they have ever chosen between completion and protection. The symptom log closes, the confession ledger opens to entry 60, your hand lifts the quill. 72 hours remain. Confession 60 begins with standard theological language. The penitent confessed to selling diseased meat during the first plague month, repackaging spoiled beef as fresh venison, collecting payment from families who could not afford waste. The sin requires careful documentation, because the family maintains wine contracts with the papal household, because Father Guillaume Arnaud will verify this entry against cardinal payment records, because incompletion here creates evidence of negligence that costs housing. You write the opening phrase without difficulty, the formation holds, the ink flows clean. Halfway through the phrase absolution granted, your hand stops. Not cramps. Not the tremor you have tracked for 6 days. The fingers lock around the quill shaft mid-letter, the muscles receiving no signal to release, your hand frozen in place, as though the body has decided without consultation that this word will not complete. You wait for the cramping to pass. The paralysis continues. 30 seconds of absolute stillness. The quill held motionless above parchment. The word granted trailing off into blank space where the theological phrase should conclude. The muscles release all at once. The quill drops to the desk. The ink spreads where it falls, a blot obscuring the half-formed letters, physical evidence that motor control has begun refusing cooperation. The confession entry now contains incomplete absolution. The last documented sin remains unresolved in the ledger's official record, the penitent's final confession, trailing off mid-phrase, as though you lost consciousness during transcription, or chose to abandon the work, or simply stopped caring whether souls received proper documentation. Father Guillaume Arnaud will read this entry and conclude negligence, or he will conclude plague-induced delirium, or he will conclude heretical abandonment of duty. The theological ambiguity you have created means the entry is either evidence of incomplete work or evidence of death during documentation, and the distinction matters for whether Marie keeps housing or loses it based on your recorded competence. You lift the quill with conscious effort. The fingers obey but require deliberate command rather than automatic response. You complete the word granted, with letters formed twice as large as the surrounding text, because precision no longer answers to intention, the theological phrase now finished but visibly degraded, the handwriting showing exactly what the inspector will examine for evidence of clerical collapse. The entry closes. You set the quill down carefully because dropping it again creates more evidence, more documentation of the body's argument against continued work. More proof that the remaining confessions might not reach completion before motor control fails permanently. 28 entries remain. Your hand has started refusing mid-word. The timeline you documented in 47 previous cases suggests you have perhaps 18 hours of controlled writing remaining before the paralysis becomes permanent, before the fingers stop obeying entirely, before the confession ledger freezes at whatever entry you were attempting when the body finally overruled intention. 68 hours until the inspector arrives. The confession ledger waits. Your hand rests on the desk, motionless, requiring your direct command to lift the quill again. Dawnlight reaches the scriptorium window while you begin the letter using parchment scraps too small for confession entries. The morning of day 6 arriving with a clarity that suggests fever has peaked, or the delirium has organized itself into functional precision, both options equally possible. The letter to Marie requires explaining strategic gaps without creating evidence that Father Guillaume Arnaud can use against your documented competence. You cannot write, "I chose to omit entries." You cannot write, "The ledger is deliberately incomplete." Either phrase becomes confession of negligence, evidence for housing revocation, proof that your failure was choice rather than circumstance. You write instead in handwriting so reduced that each letter requires magnification to read, the entire message compressed onto a single parchment square small enough to hide beneath the confession ledger's leather binding, where Marie will find it only if she looks, only if she remembers that you hide instructions in the places inspectors ignore. The text reads, entry numbers omitted for energy conservation, 59, 67, 73, 81, 84, 92, 96. Family classifications, common merchant, no cardinal connections verified. Entries completed with remaining motor control, those families maintaining papal household contracts, archdiocesan administrative positions, or documented cardinal correspondence. Strategic priority, maximum family protection through selective completion. Theological justification, absolution already granted, documentation serves administrative function. Inspector will find gaps. Inspector will attribute to plague-induced collapse. Do not correct. Do not explain. Let the incomplete ledger stand as evidence of death during documentation, rather than strategic editing. Housing retention depends on appearance of faithful service until final collapse, not on actual completion. You did not know this choice existed, now you know. The knowing is the inheritance. The handwriting requires squinting to decipher, each word formed so small that the letters blur together unless held at reading distance in direct light. You have made mercy depend on effort, protection depend on willingness to examine what appears insignificant. The final act of family service legible only to those who remember that clerks hide truth in compressed notation that inspectors dismiss as decoration. You seal the letter with plain wax, no signet, nothing that marks it as official correspondence. The parchment square slides beneath the confession ledger's binding where it will remain hidden until Marie searches the desk after the inspector departs, until she finds the compressed explanation and understands that the gaps she feared were negligence are actually the last calculated protection you could engineer before motor control failed completely. The letter hides in plain sight. The confession ledger sits above it, 28 entries still requiring documentation, your hand now responding only to conscious command rather than automatic formation. 64 hours remain until Father Guillaume Arnaud arrives to examine the incomplete ledger and decide whether strategic gaps constitute evidence of competent triage or heretical abandonment, whether your family keeps their housing or loses it based on how thoroughly he examines the spaces between completed entries. You have documented the incompletion, you have hidden the explanation. You have transformed gaps into protection mechanism, omission into inheritance, the letter now waiting beneath the ledger for Marie to discover what the inspector will never see, because he will be looking for negligence where you have left mercy compressed into microscopic handwriting that requires effort to read and therefore survives examination by those who prefer efficiency over understanding. The quill rests beside the inkwell. 28 confessions wait. Your hand requires deliberate command to continue. The dawn bell tolls prime through the window. Day 6 has begun. You sit at the desk with the sealed letter beneath the ledger, and your hands empty for the first time in 6 days. Confession 63 is complete. The ink has dried. The final entry reads, "May God receive this soul," in handwriting that required 3 attempts to form the word receive, because your fingers would not maintain pressure on the downstroke. 24 confessions remain undocumented. The gaps are now permanent. The ledger sits open to the final completed page. You have not closed it yet. The book does not understand that you will not return to it after brief interruption. Neither, fully, do you. You lift your right hand and examine the tremor that has become constant. The index finger no longer straightens completely. The thumb shows a faint purple discoloration where the quill pressed against flesh for 162 hours. You place this hand on the final entry and feel the slight texture where ink pooled in the word soul. The parchment is cool, your palm is not. You sign your name at the bottom of the page. The letters barely hold their shape. The vertical strokes lean rightward like wheat in wind. The horizontal crossings waver, but they are present. Officially present. A clerk's signature transforms documentation from provisional record to finished artifact. You have signed 263 confession entries. This is the last one that will bear your hand. The afternoon light through the window has shifted to the angle that marks none. You have been sitting here watching the final entry dry for an indeterminate period. Time has begun operating on a different scale. Minutes feel like breaths. Hours feel like minutes. The distinction between duration and sensation is negotiable now. You close the ledger. The act requires both hands and careful coordination because the leather cover is heavy and your grip is weak. You lift the cover slowly, watching your fingers shake, and lower it until it meets the backboard with a sound like a door closing in an empty room. The confession ledger is now a closed book. Its incompleteness serves family protection rather than ecclesiastical failure. Father Guillaume Arnaud will find 63 documented confessions where 87 should exist, and the gaps will read as plague-induced collapse rather than strategic omission. And your sister will remain housed because the incomplete entries bear the signature of a clerk who maintained legible handwriting through day 6. Brother Domenico will understand. Guy de Chauliac will record it as textbook presentation. Marie will find the letter and know what you chose to protect. You rest both hands flat on the closed ledger. The leather is warm from afternoon sun. Your palms are warmer. The sensation of completion spreads through your shoulders like weightlifting, except weight is not lifting. Weight is settling into a different configuration, the tension of active work replaced by the stillness of finished obligation. 63 souls documented with precision, 24 souls granted mercy through omission, 1 family protected through strategic incompletion. The numbers do not balance, but the outcome is correct. The church bell tolls outside your window. You count 3 strikes before losing track. The sound continues past your counting, existing as pure rhythm rather than measurement. You breathe in time with the fading resonance, each inhalation matched to the decay of bronze through summer air. Your hands remain on the ledger. The tremor has not stopped, but it no longer matters. There is nothing left to transcribe. The distinction between competent hands and failing hands is relevant only when writing is required, and writing is no longer required. You close your eyes. The pressure of the chair against your back becomes the primary sensation, solid, reliable. The furniture supporting your dissolution, with the same patience it supported your transcription, no judgment about which activity matters more. The bell strikes again, and you realize you've been listening to it for some unmeasured time. Not counting the strikes, not marking hours. Simply existing within the sound, as it fills the scriptorium, and fades and returns. The rhythm is slower than your heartbeat. Faster than your breathing. Somewhere between the two. a third pulse that belongs neither to your body nor to the external world, but to the space where they meet. Your breath matches the cadence without conscious intention. Inhalation as the bell strikes, exhalation as the sound decays. The pattern repeats until you cannot remember beginning it, until the synchronization feels older than this afternoon, older than this week, a rhythm you have been following since the first confession entry, without knowing you were listening. The ledger sits closed on your desk. You cannot remember closing it. The action exists in memory as completed fact without the accompanying sequence of motion. Your hands lifting the cover, the sound of leather meeting leather, the finality of the clasp settling into place. The event happened. The process has dissolved into comfortable fog. The distinction between action and rest is negotiable now. Your body understands this before your mind does. Your shoulders have settled into the chair. Your hands rest on the desk without purpose. Your head tips forward slightly, not from exhaustion but from permission. The weight of your skull no longer requiring active support. The muscles of your neck released from their professional obligation to maintain upright posture for the inspection of documents that will not be written. The light through the window has changed, warmer now. The angle suggests late afternoon, but you have no certainty about how much time has passed since you sealed the letter, since you closed the ledger, since you last counted the hours remaining before Father Guillaume Arnaud's arrival. The numbers have lost their urgency. 72 hours, 60 hours, 48. The countdown continues without you. The bell strikes again. You breathe in. The sound fades. You breathe out. Your consciousness spreads into the auditory space like ink into water, boundaries softening. The distinction between the sound striking your ear and the sound existing in the room, and the sound being produced by bronze and rope, and the decision of a sexton you will never meet. All of these distinctions dissolving into single phenomenon: bell, breath, interval, repeat. The fever behind your eyes has become temperature rather than pain, warmth, spreading through your skull in waves that match the bell rhythm. Each strike brings a pulse of heat. Each fade brings cooling. Your body tracking the pattern without analysis, responding to external rhythm as though it were internal instruction. Your hands remain motionless on the desk. Empty hands. No quill to hold, no parchment to reach for. The absence of work feels like permission rather than failure. You have spent 6 days transcribing confessions while your body dissolved. The dissolution continues, but the transcription has ended, and the ending feels correct. The bell strikes. You breathe. The sound spreads through the room and through your chest, and through the space between ribs and spine, where breath becomes exchange, air traded for time, oxygen for consciousness, each inhalation purchasing another interval of presence before the final trade completes itself. Your shoulders settle deeper into the chair, and the sensation is different from exhaustion. The posture of completion. The angle of your spine against wood changes from tension to rest, from maintenance to release. Your body knows the difference. The work is finished. The ledger is closed. What remains is not interruption requiring recovery, but conclusion requiring only patience. The pressure of the chair against your back becomes everything. Solid, reliable, indifferent. The wood does not care whether you are transcribing confessions or sitting in stillness. It supports both activities with equal commitment. The realization brings something close to gratitude, though the emotion is too large to examine directly. You let it pass through you the way the bell's sound passes through you. Present, fading, gone. Your hands rest on the desk without purpose. The right hand still shows the tremor. The left hand has begun to match it. Both hands empty. No quill, no ink, no parchment requiring your attention. The absence is permission. The empty hands finally allowed to simply exist without productive justification. without the demand that they perform some task that proves their worth. The light through the window has gone golden, the afternoon dissolving toward evening. You watch dust move through the angled sunbeam and lose track of whether you are watching for seconds or minutes. Time has changed. Not stopped. Changed. The measurement matters less than the quality. This moment has weight. The next moment will have weight. The space between them is negotiable. The weight of completion spreads through your body like warmth, starting in your shoulders where the tension lived, moving downward through your spine. Each vertebra receiving permission to release its professional requirement. Each muscle group allowed to remember that stillness is not failure, that rest is not abandonment, that the body can stop performing its function and simply exist within the space it occupies. Your breath continues matching the bell rhythm, though you have stopped consciously tracking the pattern. The synchronization happens below intention now, your lungs expanding as the sound strikes, your lungs emptying as the resonance fades, the exchange automatic, reliable, requiring no decision. The confession ledger sits closed on your desk, 63 entries complete, 24 entries strategically absent. One letter sealed beneath the cover, explaining the incompletion to the only person who matters. The work is finished. Not perfect. Finished. The distinction matters more than you expected it to matter. The pressure of the chair against your back, the weight of your head tipping forward, the warmth of your hands on wood that held them steady through 6 days of transcription. The dissolution continues, but the panic is gone. What remains is simply the body completing its process with the same methodical precision it applied to documenting the process in others. You close your eyes and the darkness behind your eyelids is not frightening, just dark, just still, just the space where sensation continues without the requirement of witness. The edges of your vision soften. The scriptorium walls remain visible, but no longer demand individual attention. Wood grain blurs into general texture. The window frame loses its hard geometry. Light arrives as presence rather than illumination, spreading across surfaces without creating distinct shadows. Your desk remains in front of you, the ledger sits closed, the quill rests beside it. These facts register without requiring visual confirmation. The relationship between I and object loosening into suggestion, rather than measurement. The afternoon sun fills the room, not directional, not casting, just filling. Warmth that has no source location, arriving from all angles at once, the space itself becoming warm, rather than being warmed by something external. Your hands rest on the desk, you can feel them there, the wood beneath your palms. But the boundary between hand and surface softens until both are simply parts of the same warm presence. Where one ends and the other begins becomes theoretical rather than actual. The confession ledger sits within arm's reach. Its pages completed, its purpose served. The specific content of each entry becomes irrelevant now. The fact of completion matters more than the individual words. Your relationship to the work shifts from active to historical. The thing you were doing has become the thing you did. Light continues spreading, not moving, just being more itself. The quality of afternoon that makes everything amber, makes hard things soft, makes separate things unified. The room a single presence rather than collection of objects. Your breathing matches the light's rhythm. Or perhaps the light matches your breathing. The distinction dissolves. Both arrive as pattern. Both continue, without requiring attention. Both exist as reliability rather than event. Vision continues softening, the scriptorium becoming suggestion, the furniture becoming presence, the light becoming everything. Your eyes remain open, but seeing becomes optional. The visual information still arrives, but no longer requires processing. Your consciousness, withdrawing from the work of sight into the rest of simply being present in warm space. The window shows afternoon, the desk holds your weight. The chair supports your body. These facts continue whether you attend to them or not. Solid and patient and requiring nothing. The architecture of rest, built from completion and warmth, and the permission to stop tracking details. The scent of burned candle wax drifts through the scriptorium. Not strong, just present. The accounting candle having burned past its hour mark sometime during the afternoon. You no longer tracked with precision. You have been dying on the church's time rather than your own, the extra wax consumed requiring eventual reimbursement. Someone will need to account for the additional hours. This strikes you as the most important remaining administrative detail. Not the confession entries. Not the handwriting degradation. Not the strategic gaps. The wax. The candle continues burning, its flames steady and vertical. The pool of melted wax at its base growing wider. Each hour of use documented in diminishing height. The mathematics of consumption rendered visible through slow dissolution. Brother Domenico will notice when he inventories supplies. He will note the discrepancy between allocated hours and actual usage. He will wonder why a dying clerk required illumination past the standard working day. He will not understand that completing 63 confessions required burning through both daylight and darkness. That legible handwriting demands good light. That the inspector's deadline cared nothing for canonical hours. The vinegar-soaked rags layered over the window emit their sharp preservation scent. The sweetness of your own body's dissolution mingles beneath. Two competing attempts at controlling decay, both failing at different speeds. The olfactory layers no longer disturb. They simply are. Neither good nor bad. Neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Just the smell of the room where completion happened. The wax scent spreads as the candle burns lower, mixing with vinegar and sweetness until all three become single presence. The boundaries between preservation attempt and natural decay dissolving into unified atmosphere. The distinction between what was meant to stop rot and what is actively rotting becoming philosophical rather than practical. Your breath carries the smell inward. Your lungs process it without judgment. The body continuing its work of taking in and letting out. Faithful and mechanical. Caring nothing for the quality of air it receives. Just breathing because breathing is what bodies do until they stop. The candle will burn until someone extinguishes it, or until the wax exhausts itself. Both outcomes equally valid. Both requiring no decision from you. The flame patient and vertical, and asking nothing. Simply being flame until it isn't. The distant tolling of bells continues. Or perhaps has been replaced by the rhythm of your own heart. The distinction between external sound and internal pulse no longer clear. Both arriving as simple rhythm without source location. Your breath matches the rhythm without effort. The synchronization complete now. You exist as rhythm rather than as body producing rhythm. The difference between self and sound becoming theoretical. The boundary between what you are and what you hear dissolving into pattern. The bell or heart continues its steady marking. Not fast, not slow, just continuing. Patient and reliable. The metronome of dissolution keeping time for a performance that has no audience and no conclusion. Just rhythm for its own sake. Sound, because sound is what happens when things persist. The confession ledger remains on your desk in peripheral awareness. Its completion allowing your consciousness to withdraw from documentation obligation. The work finished. The duty discharged. Your attention now free to drift toward the rhythm that carries everything forward. Each beat arrives complete, each pause holds perfect silence. The pattern repeating without variation, without acceleration, without decay. The rhythm that might be external, or might be internal, or might be both at once. The sound or pulse carrying you toward rest with the same efficiency it once marked working hours. Your body settles deeper into the chair. The weight distributed across wood and woven seat. The furniture holding you with the same patience the rhythm holds time. Both asking nothing. Both giving everything. Both simply continuing until continuation stops mattering. The weight of your body in the chair becomes the final sensation requiring attention. Solid and complete. The furniture supporting your dissolution with the same reliability it supported 3 months of confession transcription. You have finally encountered a documentation problem you cannot solve with better handwriting. The distinction between the rhythm of external bells and the rhythm of your slowing heart. The clinical precision you maintained for 90 days now irrelevant to the final question. The distant tolling of bells might be real. Might be the rhythm of your slowing heart. You lack the precision to distinguish between external sound and internal dissolution. The measurement you would need to make the determination requiring more consciousness than remains available for allocation. The rhythm continues, you continue with it. Consciousness and sound and heartbeat all arriving as single presence. The distinction between documentation and rest becoming unnecessary to maintain. The weight of completion settles through your body, starting in your shoulders, moving downward, each muscle group receiving permission to release. The dissolution of duty feeling remarkably similar to sleep. The rhythm carries you forward, patient and reliable, asking nothing, the final documentation complete. The final question unanswered. The weight of your body held by wood and woven fiber, and the knowledge that completion was always going to feel like sleeping.